so I can introduce the bill. Welcome, everybody.
Somebody had his coffee today.
It's one of those mornings.
You better be careful, we'll take away the apple.
Welcome, everybody. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard. Introduce.
We'll open the hearing now.
Oh, right.
Senate Bill 262.
All right.
And welcome the prime sponsor.
Thank you, senators, committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, representing District 12, the prime sponsor of SB 262. And I'm going to just be introducing it and asking the folks who helped me draft this to go through the details of it because I think they can do a much better job. But this bill basically modifies the definition of eligibility customer generation of electric energy under the Limited Electrical Energy Producers Act. Changes the apportionment of the net metering capacity and the net metering group eligibility and requires the Public Utilities Commission to investigate and report on customer generation interconnection. With regards to the investigation, it may be the Department of Energy's that we're going to have to do an amendment to that. And I think I handed you all an amendment to the bill as well, which we can discuss later. But I'm going to have some folks come up after me to discuss the guts of the bill. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And so I assume that's Amendment 2022-0740S.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And with that, we're going to hear from Mr. Monahan. And Mr. Weeks, do you want to sit with Mr. Monahan and kind of go over some of the changes? And if you don't mind, just talking about the whole concept of the bill, what we have at hand right now with regards to its original intent and why we are modifying.
Great.
You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Monahan. I'm with the DuPont Group, and I'm here this morning on behalf of Revision Energy. And
Good morning, Dan Weeks, Vice President at Revision Energy from Nashua.
Welcome.
thank you. Senator, I appreciate you as a prime sponsor and the other co-sponsors on this. What we're attempting to do with this legislation is not change the world with regard to self-generation of solar energy, but make some modest, some housekeeping and some modest improvements in the situations we have now. I'm going to walk through the four main components of the bill. Those four main components are both in the bill and in the amendment that you passed out, Senator Avard. And I think they flow in the same order. I'll talk about changes on each of those sections, but I think as you'll find is that we're able to accomplish the same goals for the most part by removing language from the bill as introduced to try to make it a little more efficient and in line with statutes which have been updated. So let me just touch on the four main components, and then Dan can fill in some of the more complex issues in a way that we can all understand, I hope. So,
We really appreciate that.
thank you. The bill has four main components. The first component deals with the net metering cap for larger customers. What it does not do is make changes to the group net metering, which is what House Bill 315 did last year. House Bill 315 increased the net metering cap from 1 to 5 megawatts for municipally owned projects. What this does is it seeks to increase the cap from 1 to 5 megawatts for an individual customer. Frankly, that's not a lot of customers in New Hampshire. You'll find it's probably mostly the big manufacturers or the folks that use more than a megawatt. What Dan disappeared on me, but what Dan will talk to you a bit about is how oftentimes they work with an industrial customer who finds out that, you know, they end up building a facility which is smaller than they need. This amendment seeks to push that cap up to as much as 5, so larger customers could install a project that fits their load profile.
500 or 5?
I'm sorry, 5. Did I say? That'd be a big project.
Yeah,
yeah, 5 megawatts. So,
cool.
so that's that section. This and that section is very similar to a bill that was filed 2 years ago. It was House Bill 1461 that was filed in the House. That bill had the support of a lot of folks in the business community. The governor's team worked on that, but ultimately didn't get across the goal line in the House committee. So what we're doing here is trying to bring that back as a concept that had some support, and now we're trying to work through the details and get it across the goal line. I'll stick with football analogies for today, Senator, if that's okay. The next section of the bill deals with the definition of a small customer for net metering. In New Hampshire today, we have different definitions of small customers depending upon the program that's at the Public Utilities Commission.
What page is that on?
That is, are you working from the amendment or the bill is introduced, Senator?
I'm looking at, actually, I have both, but.
Okay.
whatever
I think
you
it's all the same. That would be, if I go by sections, beginning with on line 1, on page 1 of the amendment, section 2. It's lengthy, but it deals with a lot of the issues around changing the definition of a small customer from 100 kilowatts to 500 kilowatts. This issue may sound familiar because there was legislation filed a couple years ago that dealt with increasing the cap from 100 to 500. Senator Waters, you remember you had an amendment to that bill. I think it was House Bill 487 to take it up to 125 megawatts, and that bill was ultimately vetoed. What we're trying to do with this change is to accommodate the concerns of the governor and others with regard to that by making a big change, I think, and that is that for those small customers that we get the net metering credit, which would be the same as a smaller customer, we require that a majority of the load be consumed on site. So if there was a concern that there was any sort of a subsidy associated with it, and there's a lot of controversy around that on every side, that this would seek to tamper that or reduce it by requiring that a majority of the load from the self-generation be consumed on site.
With regard to that load, is it 51% or is it 75% as far as the majority?
The legislation requires a majority, so that I guess that would be more than 50%. Okay. But what we're really trying to accomplish here, and Dan can talk in more detail if you want, is making sure that we match the load to the customer's requirements. So the much as we can do that, then there's less of it that's pushed back into the system from an accounting perspective. That's the goal of that. You know, ultimately, if you had 100%, that would be perfect, right? Because they would be producing at the same time they're producing. It's what they're using, but we all know the system doesn't work that way. So, the third part of the bill deals with what we think is it seems to be general agreement is a housekeeping measure. Yep.
Are you working on what page?
I'm sorry, Senator.
Amended or bill?
Why don't I work from the bill? If in the bill, it's page 3, section 3, starting at line 24.
This is why I'm having you do this instead of me. Good.
Yep. This section of the bill deals with a unique situation where the legacy statute said that if you were a self-generator, you couldn't become part of a group. And so the example I often use is Hollis is the example I use because if the Hollis Fire Department has a solar array on the roof, and then the town of Hollis does group net metering, the perverse interpretation of statute is the fire station couldn't join the group. So we're trying to eliminate that legacy issue of preventing a self-generator from being part of a group. And I think it's important now that 315 is passed and there's more municipal projects out there. And in all of your communities, I think you'll find that there's kind of here's and there's the water department or the fire station, the school has a solar array. We want them to be in the group. We don't want to have to dismiss them for that. I think that we seem to be finding universal support for this concept. We haven't found anyone who's opposed to it, and everybody believes that it's a change to take place. And then the final key section of the bill begins on page 4, section 5, and this establishes a an investigation into the issues around the interconnection of self-generation. My view is that that our system today is kind of set up from when there used to be an occasional self-generator. Somebody would put an array up, and now there's a lot of it. And so all those soft costs in the early stages of development of finding out how much does it cost and how exactly do I interconnect to the system, we believe that all needs to be updated. And what we didn't want to do is come in with a bill today to make a whole bunch of changes to that to make it easier and predictable. Instead, we're suggesting that this investigation be undertaken by the Public Utilities Commission to look at those tariffs, to make the interconnection system more affordable and predictable, have maps available, that type of thing. This type of investigation is taking place in some of the other New England states, and we think it makes sense for New Hampshire to undertake that as well.
On that point alone, would it be better for the Department of Energy to do it versus the
Yeah, no,
PUC?
that's an interesting question. So you'll hear from the Department of Energy today. I think what they're going to suggest is that in light of the change, when we went for the PUC doing policy to Department of Energy, it probably makes more sense for the Department of Energy to undertake it. I think they have the staff and the resources more so than the Public Utilities Commission. Ultimately, if there is a suggested tariff change, that would take place at the PUC.
Okay. Does the amendment reflect that, or is that something that we have to do?
That's something that Josh Elliott's going to have to do.
Okay.
So I'm kidding. He's sitting behind me, but yeah, that's a change that
Is
would have
Josh
to.
here? I don't
Yeah.
see him. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome.
Yeah,
All right.
and I should say we did meet with the Department of Energy on all of these sections, and you'll hear from them. Some of them I think are just fine. Others that, like that one, they'll want to tweak. And then the issue around the small customer generator. I'm just not sure where that's going to peter out. It's got some history to it.
Yep.
And we're not trying to pick at the scabs on that, but we also think it's important as a matter of policy to take a hard look at that.
All right.
So that's the overview of it. Dan can address any of the particulars that he thinks should be stressed that I didn't touch on, if you want to jump into that, Dan. And then,
Well, as far as the amendment is concerned,
Yep.
how does this change?
let me raise two important points to that. For the most part, as I said, the amendment reduces language in the bill. And so the four main components that I talked about are pretty much the same with different citations in the statute, things like that. There is a substantive change that I apologize for not addressing, but I think it's one that makes sense. In the first section that I talked about, which is the very largest customers being able to group meter up to 5 megawatts, when the bill was drafted 2 years ago, when it was House Bill 1481, the concept there was that those customers would, the credit would basically be based upon a wholesale transaction until the Public Utilities Commission undertook a larger investigation which would set a permanent credit for net metering. And I think the committee is familiar with that because that's how House Bill 315 acted last year. Our view is we're well on our way. That study from the commission is due this spring, which should lead to a permanent credit. So we didn't think it made any sense in this bill to say do it 2 steps, have the wholesale rate, which nobody would probably use because they're waiting for the other rate. Instead, what we said is for those customers, the credit would be the credit that is determined by the Public Utilities Commission. So that's the major change in the amendment. The rest of the sections are the same with some modifications to reduce language. Part of the reason that we're reducing on our language is we took House Bill 1481 and just kind of plopped it into the bill, and a lot of stuff has been overtaken by time since that bill passed. So,
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, Dan Weeks, Nashville, New Hampshire, Vice President of Revision Energy. In case you don't know, we're an employee-owned solar company working across northern New England. I'm one of about 330 co-owners, and we worked with Jim Monahan and have also had consistent conversation with Eversource, with the BIA, with a number of large individual energy users, and are supporting this legislation, which I want to provide a little bit of more kind of specific context on, specifically because we are hearing from a lot of large energy consumers in the marketplace. I'm thinking of some of our largest energy users, major manufacturers like Hitchner Manufacturing in Milford, Coca-Cola bottlers, Coke Northeast in Londonderry and other facilities, and a handful of others, about wanting to offset more of their electricity needs with self-generation. And so while our company is fortunate to be busy and growing within the existing markets as they exist, we are hearing consistent requests from large energy consumers about how can they participate more effectively and frankly reduce their energy costs. So we wanted to partner in providing our insight to this legislation. And I thought it might be helpful if I again walk through the four parts briefly and give some actual concrete examples of companies, of the way in which these changes would operate in the marketplace. I have the privilege of leading our commercial development team, and so get to work directly and support our team in working with a wide array of energy users in New Hampshire, large as well as small. And so to briefly walk through those parts, again, Section 1 would follow on what the legislature accomplished last year in House Bill 315, which was to allow municipalities with large energy consumption to move beyond 1 megawatt to up to 5 megawatts with some clear restrictions in place. Those generators had to be sited within municipal bounds, and they could only serve actual municipal load. So, Temple, New Hampshire, where I grew up, couldn't participate, but they don't have a lot of load to offset anyway. Nashville, where I now live, could, provided it can find space within the city to install a larger generator. They're looking, for instance, at the landfill, a portion of which is available, although the main landfill is not yet capped. So in that case, there was the allowance for large municipal energy users to expand beyond the 1 megawatt cap, provided they use all that power. And what Part 1 of this bill seeks to do is to allow large commercial energy users to do the same. A recent example, I was on the phone, exchanging emails this morning with the CEO of Associated Grocers of New England, just over the river in Pembroke. As some of you know, we were privileged to install what is currently the largest rooftop system for AG&E right at the 1 megawatt cap. However, that system takes advantage of only about 1/3 of their roof space. If folks have seen their large distribution center, that's not a surprise. And it offsets less than 1/4 of their actual load. So in that case, and in other recent cases, the desire of the client was to use their existing real estate to offset their existing load. But because of that cap, we could only use about 1/3. They hope that in future they can expand. And that's a similar case would be Hitchner, as I mentioned before, in Milford, where their consumption is actually many times the size of the generator that they were able to install. They have significant land, but right now could not use that land to offset their existing load because of the cap.
Can I ask a question? Just, I don't.
Please.
In Pettichuck, there's 12 acres worth of array going up. Is that part of the municipality or is that private? Are you familiar with it?
I am. Not a project that my company worked on, but serving Pennachuck water there by the Pennachuck Elementary School and in the land that they have. That is an interesting project in that they have completed or are in the process of completing side-by-side 1 megawatt arrays, which will offset the existing load of that utility, the water utility. Under the previous statute, before rulemaking was undertaken at the PUC, it was possible to install side-by-side 1 megawatt generators. But after Senate Bill 165, 2 years ago, the PUC undertook rulemaking which no longer would allow that to happen. So if any lot line adjustments have been undertaken in the last 10 years, you cannot put arrays side-by-side anymore. That particular set of projects got in under the line because they were already in the queue.
It's a big project, it looks like. Yeah.
It is quite large, yeah.
I'm just curious. I didn't know if
Yeah,
that was...
no, it's a great question. Not something that we expect will happen anymore, although this would allow, again, for large commercial energy users, provided, and I do want to stress, we work on a daily basis with Eversource and the other large utilities, and one of the regular pieces of feedback we receive from them, and Donna may wish to comment more, I certainly don't want to speak for them, but is the idea about intelligently siting these renewable generators so that they're providing benefit not just to the owner of the array, but to the larger rate-paying public. And specifically, their guidance from the head of distributed utilities there is that when you can co-locate generators with existing load, that brings down the peak demand.
Right.
So again, the focus on large energy users. That's part one in sort of real life. Part two, which would adjust that small customer generator threshold from 100 kilowatts to 500. One, it would bring that in line with the existing PUC definition of what a small generator is. Any system today up to 500 kilowatts can benefit from the C&I rebate program when funds last. There are not currently funds in the Renewable Energy Fund, but if funding is restored, any system up to 500 can participate in that program. But when it comes to net metering, once a generator crosses the 100 kilowatt threshold, they can no longer receive the benefits that a small customer generator receives. A practical example of this would be City of Nashua, where I live. The Fairgrounds Elementary School is one of a handful of schools that has gone with solar. It's a case where they have a significant amount of roof space, enough to get up to about 500 kilowatts, but the usage in the school is relatively low at several times in the year. And so as a large customer generator, because they cross the 100 kilowatt threshold, that means that for much of the year they are delivering excess power to the grid, which is then being sold by the utility to neighboring homes and some businesses in that part of Nashua. Practically speaking, as a large customer generator, they are paid an average rate of about 8.8 cents per kilowatt hour if we look at the last year. That power is then sold at the residential rate of about 19 cents per kilowatt hour. So that makes the financials very difficult and has resulted in a bit of a donut hole where generators generally downsize to stay small at 100 kilowatts, and only if they can go very large will they cross that 100 kilowatt threshold. So you have, like the Associated Grocers case, a lot of excess roof space that they would fill with solar or theoretically other generators, but because of the disincentive of going from a small to large customer generator, they don't.
Can't the city of Nashua just draw off that during the summertime and reduce their costs?
The challenge is that whenever the electricity leaves the meter behind which it is installed, it is under state statute, it is given the same definitive value, which is the default supply rate. And that changes depending on the rate class, either every 6 months or every month. Again, historically 8.8 cents in the case of Nashua, although the electrons flow to homes nearby at about 19 cents per kilowatt hour.
However, this does reduce the transmission load, correct?
And again, the key, as Jim just pointed out, whereas previous versions of raising this small customer generator definition would have allowed remotely sited generators to take advantage to get a somewhat higher net metering rate without reducing peak load in the same way. By requiring that co-location, that a majority of the power be used on site, you are doing what, again, we've been advised by Eversource is important from a grid benefit standpoint, which is reducing peak demand, using power where it's needed, so that there isn't a cost shift that harms ratepayers.
Yeah, that's another issue, okay.
I can be very brief on the last two if that's possible.
Yes.
Part three, a practical example would be, there's quite a few, but one that comes to mind is Stonyfield in Londonderry, large yogurt manufacturing plant that you're aware of. That's a case where back in 2006, they installed what was at the time the largest array in the state at 50 kilowatts, pretty small by today's standards. Not a project Revision installed, but we have helped them with service of that array. Because that array is connected behind one of their primary meters, which means they are defined as a customer generator, they are technically excluded from assigning the rest of their consumption to an off-site generator. This 50 kilowatt array offsets about 1% of their total load. It's a major manufacturing plant with a lot of cooling load, as you'd imagine with a yogurt manufacturer. The result is that their meter is essentially held hostage from their standpoint, because although they're consuming millions of kilowatt hours on that same meter, because it's already defined a customer generator, they would have to literally turn off their array in order to be able to participate in group net metering. We've seen some municipalities have to do the same thing. It amounts to something of a penalty for being an early adopter, and the proposal is not that they would be able to double count in any way, only what consumption is not already being offset by an on-site generator could be assigned to a group net metering project.
And this bill fixes that how?
It would fix it by actually clarifying, and to make things a little more confusing, we've had different utilities take different interpretations of this. In Liberty Territory, one of the municipalities we worked with actually said no problem. You can have a small on-site generator and assign the remainder of your load to an off-site project, which they are doing. But in other utilities, they say, no, if you are already connected, you are considered a customer generator, therefore you cannot be a group member. And by simply removing the words in the amendment, this is page 3, toward the last paragraph there, you see strike through who are not customer generators. That is literally all that is required to allow the Stonyfields or other municipalities that were early adopters to not essentially have those meters hostage because they went with a generator early in the process.
Would Worthing be part of that? Is it, yeah, in Nashua, they have a big array, don't they?
There is Worthing, actually, David Worthing is here today and may speak more to that. I don't know what percentage of your manufacturing load is offset by that 1 megawatt array, and whether the...
It's relatively, it's probably around, it's between 30 to 40%.
Yeah.
And we were, again, that's why we put a megawatt on there.
So this would allow them to also assign the remaining 50 to 60% to a remote generator.
All right.
And the last section, very quickly, as Jim mentioned, as New Hampshire has moved toward progressively larger projects up to the megawatt cap, and now we're starting to see some municipal projects go beyond that under House Bill 315, the interconnection process and requirements and costs have gone up very significantly. We are routinely seeing, I'm thinking of 2 recent system impact studies we got back for municipalities. One, an estimate of $1.5 million to interconnect to the grid. The other, $1.4 million to interconnect for a 1 megawatt system. We've had other megawatt systems in the mid to high 6 figures. The challenge is not that we fully accept, and our customers accept, that there will be interconnection costs. The challenge is that there is not currently any transparency or clear process by which to estimate and determine what those upgrades will be. And that has resulted, not surprisingly, in significant inconsistencies between utilities. And we don't fault the utilities, they just have different methodologies, and in the absence of some guidance, and we're not proposing what those requirements would be, rather that a process would be undertaken at the DOE or PUC, which would bring all the stakeholders together to figure out what that best process should be. What it has meant, practically speaking, in the cases where we've seen these $1 million+ interconnection requirements, is that projects simply die on the vine. What is challenging is that we see similar projects come in at a much lower price point in other utility territories. For instance, until 2 years ago, the most we ever saw a utility require in terms of reclosers, it's a modern version of fusing as a protective device on the grid. We only saw 1 being required. That's common in other states. We're now seeing 3 or more reclosers required, the cost of which has tripled in the last 2 years. So the examples I gave of $1.4 million, $1.5 million are outliers, but we are seeing many cases where upwards of $500,000 or more is required, and a lot of the protective devices being required by some utilities are miles away from the point of interconnection. We've heard from utility representatives that that is a benefit to the circuit and grid at large, and that they think it would be appropriate to share those costs in some way because the primary service is around grid resiliency for the entire circuit. But right now, there's no guideline, and so we are also seeing a lot of projects fail because of standards that differ from other New Hampshire utilities, or in some cases, the same utility operating in a different state.
So the Department of Energy would be able to hone that in and make it more
More
transparent,
standard
I
and
guess.
transparent.
Right.
We
So-
think that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
We don't assume that as a solar company, which is self-interested, that we would be setting those rules. We would hope to participate in the process alongside the utilities, alongside customers, so that customers, users, even ratepayers have some predictability around what the interconnection standards are. And I'll just close by noting this has been a process followed in a lot of other states that have proceeded a bit further in terms of deployment of distributed energy, and that has allowed, again, for clarity and transparency as that unfolds. So in sum, we, again, are fortunate to have plenty of business within the existing markets, but it is somewhat frustrating to regularly tell customers that their project just doesn't work in this state, although maybe another division of the same company is doing a similar project in another state. So we think that this would enable more large energy users to benefit and curb some of their electricity costs, which we know are very high in this state. And finally, we think there would be some broader benefits in terms of continued investment and workforce here. We hope to hire a lot more people in the state of New Hampshire to do these projects. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for Senator Gray? I'll get you.
When we were discussing Senate Bill 261, we talked about consuming 15%, behind the meter. This, in line 14, 15 on page 3, talks about the majority. Assuming the majority is 50.01, and then on that same line, 14, it says that consume the majority of the load on site. A load is not the generation, and I think you're talking about what is generated and not the load. So I'd like to get you to comment on those, please.
And apologies, I'm looking at the as introduced version. I think you have the amendment here.
The amendment here.
The intention is that a majority of the generation,
The as introduced, it's on page 3, line 1920. Essentially the same words.
thank you for picking that up. I believe you are correct. It has been our understanding and intention that this would be, the term load can be interpreted in different ways, but typically it refers to the consumption of energy within the facility, whereas generation is what is intended. So majority of the generation load would be consumed on site on an annual basis. So I think we would recommend, if we may, that in a final version of the amendment, that the term load be changed to generation. And I apologize, Senator Gray, I had not focused on that, but that is certainly what we had in mind in recommending that change.
So on the replace all amendment, page 3, is that correct? Or it says vote
Page
on-
3, line 14.
Correct. So that would be changed to,
Remove the word load and replace it with generation.
follow up, Senator Gray?
I also wanted him to comment on the 20% and majority, when what applies.
So the current net metering 2.0, which was adopted through the settlement process in September of 2017, allows for large customer generators, currently over 100 kilowatts, to either assign their generation, 100% of generation, to a group through group net metering, or if they consume 20% on-site, they are permitted to sell the remainder. But that only pertains to large customer generators. So I want to make sure I'm seeing exactly where you're referring. We were not proposing to change anything about large customer generators, specifically simply to change the threshold where a small becomes a large. So we would not amend the 20% requirement that pertains to large up to 1 megawatt, which is the current net metering settlement.
Oh, again, the gentleman that was in here, I believe it was Packy Campbell, is not a large generator, does not want to be a net metering host, but when he invested in solar panels, those panels provide, in various sites, some do provide more than 80%, that he would be returning. Again, I'm just trying to figure out, you've got the word majority in this one,
Yes.
all right? 20% came somewhere else in the statute, it's not in this amendment. I'm just trying to understand when 20% applies and when 50.001% applies.
And I hope this is clear. Thank you for the question, Senator Gray. The 20% rule under current statute, which we are not proposing to change, only applies to a generator that is classified a large customer generator. So this majority requirement would pertain to the new category of small customer generators between 100 and 500 kilowatts in size. So we would not be adjusting, if this went through, that 20% rule would still be part of the large customer generator definition up to 1 megawatt, so 500 kilowatts to 1 megawatt. Separately in section 1, the proposed language would take from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts with a similar on-site consumption requirement, except it requires that all generation be used by the entity owning the generator. I know that's rather confusing because there are multiple tiers. We thought it would be less confusing to not change an additional piece of the formula, leave what's in place already as it pertains to large customer generators between now 500 and 1 megawatt. But if that should be adjusted as well, we would certainly be open to that.
Again, it's, there's a lot of difference between 20% and 50%. And,
Right.
Having clear definitions, of when you cross the line is important, when we do this legislation. So I'm still confused.
Good.
So, all right.
It's not this isn't a simple concept, and it's been in the works for years. And so minor changes, major changes, they all take a lot of thought. But right now, we're looking at, in the first section, from just changing for small host from 100 kilowatts to 500 kilowatts. We're not changing the large hosts. With regards to the majority, as Senator Gray was talking about, that doesn't affect the large hosts as well, correct? They're still under the 20%, right?
The large host would not change except in the proposed amendment for part 1 of the proposed language, for those over 1 megawatt. So we're not trying to make it more permissive when you cross that threshold. Right now, a large customer generator up to 1 megawatt has the 20% option. We're proposing here that when you cross a megawatt, in order, back to the arguments we've been hearing from the utility around on-site consumption, consistent with HB 315 requiring municipal consumption. The proposal would be that once you cross, you have the benefit of being able to build a larger system that comes with a steeper requirement than the current 20% rule, which is unchanged for large customer generators below a megawatt. But above a megawatt, you would have the stricter requirement that all of the generation has to be accounted for, used by the owner of the array.
Senator Waters?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wondered if you could review the strikeout that is in the amendment page 1, section 2. And it looks to me like what you're doing there is getting rid of the first come, first serve, and also the way in which it had to be apportioned between the utilities. And I think I understand why that's struck, but if you could explain it.
I think the short explanation, Senator Waters, thank you, is that that was an artifact of the pre-net metering 2.0 settlement in 2017,
Okay.
which, as you recall, lifted that overall aggregate cap in the state of New Hampshire of 100 megawatts. Previously, it had been 50. So in that new settlement, which reduced net metering values, the cap was removed. So this language was no longer relevant.
Yeah, I thought just basically it seems extraneous to the way we're doing things. Okay.
Follow?
And then on the section 1 above, so the 125% here basically still means that there's a hard cap at 5 megawatts. Right, so you guys suppose could build a 5 megawatt system if you were going to use 4 on site and figured that you'd be able to have some wiggle room there, but the hard cap is still 5, even with this 125%.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
And I misspoke a few minutes ago. The 100% requirement we're proposing to be a little bit more stringent. They would have to use at least 125%. So the generator could not produce more than 125% of the consumption of the customer on an annual basis. Again, the theory being that by permitting larger generators, a benefit to the owners of those generators, it is appropriate to have more stringent requirements around the consumption of that power.
Is that perfectly clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
And certainly, it's very challenging because we're trying to make, modifications to a complex structure of, statutes, legacy statutes, and tariffs and regulations at the Public Utilities Commission. So I appreciate the questioning, and we of course certainly understand that none of this is easy, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. So appreciate the committee's.
Senator Gatta?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For purposes of debate and discussion, would the parts of this bill be divisible and therefore not sacrifice the entire content? Or does this have to be done in the aggregate?
I think that's a fair question. What we didn't want to do is ask Senator Avar to sponsor 4 bills. So the answer to that,
Good question.
the answer to that is yes, although we prefer, all 4 components of it to go forward.
And I would just add, if I may, Senator, the, again, motivation for trying to bring this forward is to meet what we see as a handful of pain points, if you will. So the large energy users and those small, mid-sized, as well as those municipalities or Stonyfield that have the small arrays. Obviously, they're independent issues, but they are regular concerns that we are hearing from the marketplace.
Senator Waters?
Yeah, just to follow up. So to circle back to Senator Gray's question, basically we have existing statutory determinations over the 20% versus the 50%, right? I mean, that's all existing. And what this is saying, without disrupting that here are some changes that could be made to fulfill these purposes.
So without changing the existing 20% rule for large customer generators up to 1 megawatt, again, it becomes more stringent when you cross 1 megawatt. We are proposing to specifically expand the small customer generator threshold to address this donut hole challenge.
So just one more follow-up. It's pretty obvious that we're gonna continue to have discussions over net metering and the 20 and the 50, and, this is just such a shifting landscape. We need to have discussions about that. We've come a long way, but we need to go further. But for now, because that conversation is gonna take longer, this lets some things be done without upsetting the apple cart of the 20 and the 50.
That's right. I'll just note that the intention here is to offer a fairly modest incremental adjustment to address those most severe pain points, if you will, in the market. As Jim mentioned earlier, and part of the reason that the language designating what that net metering value will be has been taken out in this proposed amendment is that we are now 3 years into a value of solar study, which we believe is nearing completion at the PUC. And that will allow, I trust, the very legitimate debate around what cost shift is occurring to be put to bed because of a robust empirical process by the third-party independent entity. You have different opinions on all sides. So I think that will substantially help, hopefully, all parties feel good about New Hampshire's current net metering policy. But this, again, would allow for those particular markets that are being unaddressed or ill-served to be better served today.
Okay. Any further questions? One final one, just who are not customer generators, that striking of that language in the amendment. How many businesses does that help?
There, by our estimation, and I don't have exact numbers, but in the state of New Hampshire, there are close to 10,000 installed solar arrays, of which on the order of 3 to 5% would be commercial, I believe. So it is in the hundreds of businesses that have a small array. Many of them, that array is big enough. They don't have much existing load, but a subset of those, which I suspect would be in the low hundreds, are using significantly more power than they are offsetting. So they could theoretically assign their remaining load to an independent group net metering generator.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Really appreciate your testimony, seeing how there's no further questions. And Mr. Warden, would you like to testify next?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. I'm here in support of 262. We've just heard all the confusing parts of why it's complicated. Worthen Industries, just to give you a little bit of background to who I am, we're a manufacturing company. Our headquarters are in Nashua, New Hampshire. We have locations in Virginia, Massachusetts, Michigan, where did I forget, and also in Europe and in China. We're a manufacturer, so we use a fair amount of energy. Our array in Nashua, in one of our facilities, is at a megawatt, and it was put in there at a megawatt really because of the limit that we discussed earlier here with Dan. That certainly was, our goal here is have less expensive energy. We pay for a lot for our energy here in New Hampshire, and offsetting and sort of hedging your energy and your energy future with having solar on your roof is certainly a welcome thing for those of us here in New Hampshire, particularly. Although we do have solar arrays in Massachusetts and in Michigan. We're in the process of doing that as well, and in Virginia. So I just wanted to, again, give you the support for that and understand that, a megawatt for someone who's in business and using any significant amount of electricity is a pretty small number, and it would do well to be able to increase that size for some of the larger employers here who need to hedge those prices for energy. So,
Senator Waters with a question.
Yeah, so what can you do in Massachusetts and Virginia and Michigan?
what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, what can you do in terms of the size of your
The
arrays?
payback, we look at it just when we have the guys come in to do it. The payback is relatively similar to what it is here,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they have lower energy prices. And again, if like here, it's like a ridiculous for me, very confusing, right? So there's a ramp up, and to give you an understanding for those of you know that you probably all understand this, but net metering for a large customer here really doesn't amount to. One of the things that I think we found is payback was significantly greater in New Hampshire than we had once predicted, partly because the facility that we put it on, that one facility, operates 4 days a week, 24 hours a day. And because of that, there's 3 of the 7 days that goes back out at wholesale prices. So they've gone up in recent time, but you know, at some point it was 2.5 cents. I don't know where the 8 cents came from, but you know, the credit that we get for the power that goes back into the grid is pretty
I guess,
low.
wait a minute, what size arrays can you do in the other states?
That's a megawatt there.
In the other states?
Oh no, in Massachusetts, I think we're like 350, and we have 700 going into Michigan, and we have about 350. They're smaller facilities.
Okay, thank you.
You know, and the majority, just to give you a little bit of who we are. The 45% of where the industry is exported to other countries, and the majority in the facility here is export outside of this. Obviously, we've been challenged in the last bit. Sales have been strong, but challenged is to say is an under.
Are you looking for battery storage at all, by any chance?
Yes. The answer is yes. I think we're still, you know, early on those situations, because obviously that would help us, and especially where we are. And you know, we expect to increase. We have capacity, obviously, here, particularly in Nashua, and you know, we also hope that we'll be running 24/7 someday, right?
Nice. Great. Appreciate your testimony. Are there questions from the committee?
Any questions?
I'm glad that you're not the only one confused. I'm the sponsor of the bill, right? And it just, it's difficult. And one of the reasons for this is I still have an underlining need to reduce our transmission loads. And the more I see of these types of projects going out, I really want to reduce our transmission loads, because for some reason we have very, very high costs in New Hampshire.
Right.
And I think a lot of that has to do with transmission. I may be wrong. The jury's still out, but I really believe that reducing our load of transmission costs reduces everybody's overall
Overall
picture.
cost.
And so by putting in legislation like this, I call them the big fat power lines. That's our big costs. For the working folk out there that are trying to absorb what we're really trying to do here. Is the reason I'm for these type of projects is the fact that for some reason New Hampshire is exceedingly high nationwide, and I guess you can testify to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. I mean, again, we don't see a lot of difference on our payback in our other locations. It's never as good as what we once thought.
Mm-hmm.
Prices have gone up on those things. One thing we do is actually produce components that go into solar panels as well, and in other parts of the world we don't do it here. But we hope that's a manufacturing part of what can happen on this continent is, you know, we can start making stuff here. That's our goal. I'm a making stuff guy. Right?
We like it. We like it, and we
So-
like that fact that you're doing it here in New Hampshire. So we appreciate your testimony and for stepping up.
Thank you.
I'm going to have Cliff Bilo. Cliff, you're always interesting to listen to. So, and you want to talk, and so we want to listen. How are you today?
Very good, thank you, Senator Avard,
And you're in
members of the
support of this
committee.
bill?
I am here in support of the bill. I do have some observations, and I think they may have been addressed in the proposed amendment, which I have not seen, but I'll just provide a little context. Just looking at the bill as introduced, I think they picked up on the fact that in the definition, it should say, but not, but less than 5 megawatts. Maybe that's in the amendment. Oh, here's a version. Well, I don't see it in the amendment, but it does seem like the text at around line 9, where it says, over the past 12 months, but less than 5 megawatts might be added to that, mainly because anything that's 5 megawatts or more in terms of the interconnection allowance at least automatically becomes FERC jurisdictional and shouldn't be eligible for net metering because it's in a different jurisdictional paradigm.
Where would I put that again, Cliff?
Looking at the amendment, line 9.
Which says 1 megawatt?
Well, I was thinking at the comma after over the past 12 months and say, but less than 5 megawatts, comma, if greater than 1 megawatt.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So,
After a megawatt, I think.
or it could go at the, if greater than 1 megawatt, but
All right.
in any case, less than 5 megawatts, something like that should be in there. I concur with the strikeout now that I see it in section 2 of the bill at the bottom of the first page. I would also suggest that 1A in its entirety could be struck out. That was actually repealed a couple of years ago. And that was an interim provision. Actually, it's probably more than a couple of years ago. That was an interim provision to handle the queue when we were in between, when we were running into the caps before PUC Order 26029, which was the order that came out of DE 16576, which was the net metering proceeding. And in that, some previous legislation that actually Senator Bradley sponsored that triggered that proceeding, this was 1A was enacted as a bridge until the commission decided whether there should be any caps at all. And in that proceeding, they decided there's no need for any more caps. So 1A was, in effect, was repealed, and that's noted online. And it doesn't, there's no reason to reenact it because there aren't any of these Q issues anymore.
So strike 1A?
Yes.
Two.
Page 2, line 7. Yep.
If I may ask a question to clarify.
Yep.
It was not repealed in statute. It was repealed by the PUC.
No, the legislation actually, it was oddly left to legislative services to determine the repeal of that. And it was once the commission had made essentially an order in DE 16576, if it, I looked it up last night. I don't have it at my fingertips, but there was criteria in the legislation that enacted 1A, and actually it was not Senator Bradley's bill. It was a bill that Senator Susi sponsored, and there was repeal language in designated when 1A was to be repealed, and it was when this interconnection queue issue was resolved, and it has been resolved, so it's just not relevant anymore. And it was in fact repealed. 1A does not exist in statute currently.
It's not in the state RSAs.
Correct. It is noted as having existed, but then it's also noted that it has been repealed.
That's interesting.
So you can go online and see 1A, but there's a note right online that says it has been repealed and only applies to a particular historic period of time.
So if I may follow on that, I'm sorry to interrupt your testimony, but just to be clear then, there is, under this, wonder what we have in the amendment, you see the 500 kilowatts there.
Yes.
But if since this has been repealed and we're not putting it back in, then it creates no issue of not having the 500 kilowatts there.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
And let me provide a little more context. As part of what was then, in 2015, Senator Bradley's bill, Roman section 16 to this RSA was enacted. And you don't have that in front of you, but I'll just summarize that it called for the commission through an adjudicated proceeding to develop new alternative net metering tariffs. Part of that is in statute says the commission may waive or modify specific size limits and terms and conditions of service for net metering specified in paragraphs 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that it finds to be just and reasonable in the adoption of alternative tariffs for customer generators. What that means is that the specific size limits and other provisions of paragraphs 1, which is the first part of the bill, 3, which is repeated in the amendment at the bottom of page 2, as well as 4, which is also part of the bill, those were in fact restated in that PUC order coming out of that proceeding that created new net metering tariffs. So I'm not quite sure that these changes do what the proponents of the bill want. So what I'm suggesting is that a way to be clear about that would be, because the order itself states that we find the 100 kW threshold to be reasonable and will continue that as the demarcation between small and large. This changes it in statute, but a part of the statute that the commission was able to waive and sort of decide in that order. So if the intent is to make the effect of that order recognize that 100 kW up to 500 should also be treated like small generators in that order, you might want to expressly state that, because otherwise I think there may be an ambiguity that these changes don't necessarily change the effect of that order, which had the authority to supersede these specific provisions in statute, if you kind of follow me. So I'm just suggesting a belt and suspenders approach that might, like you did in 315 with group net metering, especially tie back to that order and say that the small customer shall be considered up to 500 kW, with these other provisions under that order as well.
Nope, keep going.
Okay, that was one concern I had. The other really tiny one is on page 2 of the amendment, which is also in the bill as introduced. It's also on page 2 of the bill as introduced. It's line 17 as introduced, line 18 as in the amendment. That as near as I can tell, that's a precise restatement of that existing section Roman 2 as it exists in statute today. I compared it word for word and I couldn't see any difference. If you're going to bother to, sort of reenact it with the same text, there is a little typo that could be corrected that's in statute, which is at line 24, where it refers to a load service entity. Yeah. The real term of art is load serving entity, which is a defined term with ISO New England, and everybody understands its meaning. But somewhere along the way, when that was originally enacted, serving got converted to service. So that's the minor point. And the next kind of sections I really don't have issue with. I think Senator Gray, caught one key point on that, but I do have a suggestion on the very last section of the bill.
The amendment or the?
It appears to be in both versions. So it is page 4 in both the amendment and the bill is introduced. It's line 26. Let me see. It's line A, B, C. It's line 26 in the bill is introduced, rewritten as line 28, page 4 of the amendment. And it references, well, I'm going to have to go back to the bill as introduced because the language in the amendment is a little bit different. And what I wanted to suggest was where the bill is introduced says, where grid modernization upgrades may be preferred to prepare a circuit for a distributed generation project, how to share the cost between project developer and ratepayers, that's the way it reads now. I would suggest adding how to share the cost between project developers, future project developers, and ratepayers who may also benefit from increased interconnection capacity and reliability associated with upgrades. And there's sort of language here, and my only real point is it might not just be sharing with ratepayers who may see some benefit, but other future project developers. And I'll give you a case in point. And there's an analogy that exists in existing municipal law concerning water and sewer utilities. The city of Lebanon has just signed an interconnection agreement with Liberty Utilities to develop a 1 megawatt landfill gas to energy electric generation project. As part of that, we've agreed to pay in excess of $500,000 in distribution system upgrades. A lot of those are project specific and so are entirely appropriate. Some of them, however, extend all the way up to national grid side of the substation to make that substation, which has like a rated capacity of over 20 megawatts, capable of handling a reverse power flow onto the transmission grid. That will be, and the chance that our 1 megawatt will ever cause a reverse power flow is virtually nil, but they just want us to go ahead and pay for that upgrade, both on the Liberty side of the substation and National Grid. So we've agreed to it. That actual capability will actually expand, create a possibility for many other projects to be built behind that substation without having to pay for that upgrade. I think conceptually it would be reasonable to think if other projects come along and benefit from that upgrade that we might somehow get paid back, or at least we think that should be part of a discussion. And the analogy that is allowed under municipal law that we just took advantage of in the past year or two is we have constraints in our sewer system in terms of capacity for new interconnections. So some developers said, you know, we would pay to upgrade this section of the sewer line from an 8-inch, you know, to a 12-inch. You know, we only need 9 inches, but the cost is about the same to go from 8 to 12 versus 8 to 9. And we actually developed an ordinance that says, okay, if somebody else comes along after you that benefits from the capacity that you paid to upgrade, then they can, you know, you can get partially paid back for that investment you made that actually benefits others who come after you. I just wanted
to say that was my bill that enabled that.
Well, thank you. Because it got us out of a conundrum.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an analogy.
Yeah.
Exists, you know, I put that bill in because of this very point.
Yes.
That an investor now will be able to have some payback for the investment made when other people come in.
Right.
And that's a reasonable analogy for at least having that looked into as part
right.
of the commission here.
Right. So that's all I'm saying is I think that's an appropriate thing for the study commission. Yeah. And actually the interconnection agreement we negotiated and signed with Liberty actually allows that possibility. It says if in the future there's some provision that will allow us to recoup some of that we could consider that.
So on line 28, you would amend that on the new amendment? Is that what your suggestion to include what you just spoke about?
I think, you know, now that I'm reading the amendments and you know, it says an appropriate cost sharing among parties benefiting from such upgrades, right. That may actually cover it. Okay. So. But
now we understand.
Now you understand why they, you know, others of the amendment actually, I think, had the foresight to realize that the other parties might be not, you know, might include other developers down the road, not just other ratepayers. So fair enough.
Questions from the committee? Clear as mud. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your testimony.
Sure.
Thank you very much. That was helpful. All right. So, Josh, you want me to hold you off to the end or what?
Whatever your preference.
I like you now.
I will say that is a tough act. It's always a tough act to follow in this committee, to follow Cliff Bulow. At any rate, for the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, the New Hampshire Department of Energy. The department does not have a position on this bill, although I would like to point out a few concerns that we have. I'll go through section by section. First section, of course.
Josh? On the amendment or the?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm working on the amendment. I'm working off the amendment. So 0740S.
Thank you.
So in section 1, again, the change up to 125% within the last 12 months. I know it was sort of referenced in earlier testimony, and you're probably all tired of hearing me say it, but we do have this value of distributed energy resources study that's currently ongoing. We expect to have it completed by the end of, by late spring of this year. That will, of course, then kick off going back to the PUC through the rate-making process to sort of get to the bottom of, is there sort of all these open questions there are about net metering, of why we always, we're back here, we're making changes here and there, but to finally get back to the Public Utilities Commission in order to actually develop sort of a rate going forward. There have also been changes, as folks have mentioned, expansion for municipal net metering under House Bill 315. So we think this may be premature in terms of all this additional information gathering that is out there. There's also sort of more of a technical concern about what happens if for some reason that electric consumption drops. Say if you have a facility, it's operating at full tilt, you're working under these parameters where you have an installation built to 125% of your electric consumption, and then something happens, for whatever reason, demand drops for the factory, and all of a sudden say you're operating at 50% capacity or something like that. Does that mean we have to then go out and sort of start disconnecting? Do you then have to derate your system if you experience sort of an extended load drop? As Mr. Below mentioned in section 2, I know it is quite confusing with these various sections of statute, because there is the authority given sort of the Public Utilities Commission. I think that he laid out quite well to supersede, I think maybe a better way to describe it, supersede statute. And I agree that you could remove section Roman 1-A, which is lines in the amendment, lines 7 through 17, because it's referring to the section above, so you can take that out entirely as well. In regards to the shift to the 500 kilowatts up from the 100 kilowatt break, there's no real way to know the impact of this. Again, we're looking at these through the VDERS. Whether or not there is cost shifting. That's sort of the crux of all of these arguments as to whether or not the cost shifting does or does not exist, and to the extent that if there is cost shifting, that it's offset by, as you highlighted, transmission costs. We don't know the answer to that, but to the extent that it does exist, this would increase it by 500% because you're going from the 1 to 500.
And if it doesn't?
And if it doesn't, then it would have no impact at all. But we don't know. In section 3, there's sort of I understand there's sort of these absurdities that exist of where you have a municipal net like the fire station example. I think one of the previous testifiers mentioned, of where you have it within the town, and then you try to go to group host net metering, and all of a sudden you have this sort of weird island in the middle. I don't know if there's an easier way to I should say probably not easier way, a more precise way of sort of fixing those absurdities without inadvertently creating other absurdities, because then you would have somebody who's net metering and also participating in a group host, where there are sort of, again, like the absurdities have been laid out, but then you might run into other absurdities. So I don't know if there's a way to sort of thread that needle of saying if someone who's newly eligible is allowed to do both. In a way to, rather than just sort of open it up, maybe do a narrow exemption for those to solve those absurdities that have developed.
Do you have any suggestions?
You could do something to and this is off the top of my head, so don't, I would want to make sure I have a clean way of doing it rather than just sort of rambling, but I can, if you wish, I can take it back and suggest language that might clean that up.
Yeah. I mean, you said newly eligible, but the point is that these are folks who already exist. So why would you penalize them just because they already existed?
Exactly. No. So that would be the intent of making sure that they could participate without sort of the absurdity where you open it up for everybody else.
All right. I just misunderstood what you meant by newly eligible.
Okay. Sorry. I meant newly eligible under House Bill 315.
Gotcha.
Sorry. I should have been more precise. So I'm going to skip I'm going to skip ahead. Section 5 with the host capacity maps. We have no issues with that at all. I know there are other states that do this. For example, Massachusetts does this. I think they've been doing it for a while, so I think this is probably, I mean, the utilities could speak to the cost implications, but generally speaking, these host capacity maps, I think would be a good idea, would help both distributed folks who are looking to install distributed generation as a way to where to put it best and to sort of save time up front rather than going through the whole process and then running into large interconnection cost issues. So then I'm going to take a step back and take sections 4 and 6 together because they're sort of they're intertwined with each other. I've lost my page here. It is very technical. And the net metering rules are with the Department of Energy, so it does make sense rather than the PUC to undertake this, for the Department of Energy to undertake this, I believe is the...
Under section 4?
Yes, under section 4, and, hold on. Yes, under section 4 as well as section 6, so it's really in section 6 to change the references to from the Commission to the Department of Energy to undertake this study. I will say it is will take significant resources and time, but it's something the department considers worth doing. Will involve.
How would I word that under section 6 instead of Public Utilities Commission, change to the Department of Energy?
Yeah, so it would. Yeah, because I'm trying to figure out. Okay, no, it's just okay because it's in chapter law, not actually in statute. So yeah, you would just take in section 6, you would strike on line 13 to say Department of Energy, and then Department again investigation, and then actually as long as we're walking through this, it would be tremendously helpful for the department on line 15 to change that 30 to 90 days. This is a complex undertaking and will require outside experts and consultants to help the department to complete this report. So just to give us a little bit of extra lead time in order to actually find the appropriate folks to help us out doing this.
So we would also change line 16 PUC again?
Yes, so line 15 would be to change from that 30, the request is to change from 30 to 90 days. And then further on line 15, you would strike the commissioner should be the department. And then again on line 16.
No, not there.
Let's see, the rules of so that also complicating this fact is that a lot of we're undergoing, as you imagine, with the department reorganization or the creation and the reorganization. A lot of the PUC rules are coming over to the Department of Energy.
Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
In line 16, it's making a reference to the existing PUC rules, so we don't want to strike that and replace it with a DOE.
Yeah, so that process is still
That
undergoing.
stays.
Yeah, so that should stay for now. Yes, thank you. That should stay put for now, just at least while that process is ongoing, and for whatever
And then
reason.
line 18, where it says commission there, then that's DOE.
Yes, that should be department, and then you could probably actually strike the Department of Energy at the end of line 19, since we'll be the one doing the study, and then inserting on line 20, or say striking on line 20, any person or entity of the department, striking the word commission, deems relevant to the study. Line 21, striking the commission to the Department of Energy. And then finally on page 5, line 1 says the department shall issue a report striking commission. Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, line 36 as well, sorry. Line 36, striking the commission, adding the department reasonably believes. And I'll do a further look
Okay,
while their folks are testifying, just to make sure we haven't
just
missed
back
anything.
up a little bit on this, if I may, Josh, on line 30 on page 4, we heard Mr. Bilo, Deputy Mayor Bilo, say that he assumed that parties benefiting might be include, it might include future parties, and you would interpret parties benefiting the same way.
Yes, I would.
Okay, thank you.
So if you would prefer to do belt and suspenders approach, you could use the language that.
Well, I don't, I mean, if you see it the same way.
Yes, I
you
would
have to
interpret.
change the language.
Okay,
That's
I
all
would
wanted to
I would
clarify.
interpret it that way because I think
Thank
that's an important consideration to make if somebody's
Let the
making that
record show.
investment. With that, I think those are. I will, as I'm back at my seat, I will go through just to make sure we've caught all the commission and department changes.
Thank you, Josh.
Oh,
Senator Waters for the question.
Yeah, could we back up to section 1 and your concerns there about whether this is premature? I guess, I mean, it's not clear to me that what may or may not come out of the study that's underway, in fact, would have any real reference to this or any real change to this. So I guess I'm not sure why this is premature.
Well, because it is still impacting the current existing net metering structure. Whether or not this change may make complete sense, but we just don't have all of the information in terms of all of the impacts that these studies will anticipate actually looking at and sort of getting to the bottom with. I know reasonable people may disagree with the outcomes of the study, but in order to, with these proposed changes to the net metering structure.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
But it just seems to me, Josh, that this is one small piece of that much larger issue. So that if something comes out of the study which offers some clarification over the whole large issue, it will then at that point affect this. And so I don't really see why making this change now really makes a lot of difference in terms of the larger issue that's coming up.
And I don't want to speak to what the study may or may not. For the record, I haven't seen it yet, so I haven't seen the results.
It's not.
But I think rather than sort of making an interim change and only come back to make another change where there may be, there may be a higher cap, there may be a different rate, a different tariff that's proposed that might be more attractive. Just in terms of all of these smaller changes sort of within the statute, I understand where you're coming from, and where we've heard a lot of sort of the absurdities of where somebody has a large amount of demand behind the meter and they can only go up to the 1 megawatt cap. I acknowledge the absurdity of that, and that's sort of an artifact of the PUC order informing this whole discussion.
I guess I'm just not sure it's a distinction that makes a difference. And then finally, on this matter, it seems pretty clear from the LEAP study that it is going to be hard to really get an answer on this potential cost shifting until there is new metering. And in part 6, that's one of the things that's supposed to be looked at. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not really sure that any answers that come out of this study are really going to be answers until we actually get the metering done, and that's not happening anytime soon. So, I mean, would you disagree with that kind of approach, look to it?
I think it's worth at least seeing what the study has. They may not be able to speak to it. They may be able to speak to it. I know the difference. I know the LEAP Commission did a lot of good work over this past summer. We have, as somebody who signs off on the invoices, a very expensive consultant who is working on this, and very thorough consultant that I hope can get to sort of at least provide more additional information that provides clarity to the situation that allow policymakers to make informed decisions.
Josh, when is that study?
It was late spring of 2022, so I'm hoping sooner rather than later. But again, that will then kick off sort of everything going back to the PUC to re-engage that docketing process.
Any further questions? Senator Gray?
Josh, can somebody get on my calendar and explain me when the 15%, the 20% applies? Because I still don't understand it even in the light of the testimony, and I would like to understand that before I vote on this bill.
Okay, I will text Shannon to set up an appointment. Daily, I will contact you about setting up an appointment.
All right. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Josh. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator.
John Gage? Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Senator. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony. John Gage from Windham, New Hampshire. I am in support of this bill. I think it looks like smart incremental changes that will get rid of some roadblocks to help us deploy local energy resources that we need more of in our state. So you've been in the weeds, and I'm very thankful that there are people that are going through the details and getting this right. I'm going to take a different approach so you can just relax about the, the details about the bill and give you a little perspective. I'm a volunteer of Citizens Climate Lobby. In fact, I'm the New Hampshire State Coordinator. We're working to create the political will to enable Congress to pass effective and equitable climate legislation, starting with carbon fee and dividend, which is a steadily rising fee on the production of fossil fuels based on their carbon emissions, rebating all the money back to households to protect family budgets during the energy transition, and using border adjustments to put our carbon price on imports and rebate our exporters in trade with countries that don't match our carbon price. Why does this?
One quick question. Are we going to be talking about the bill specific or
Yes.
something different?
Well, I'm giving justification for why these, the changes that are being made in this bill make sense for New Hampshire.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll keep it short.
I appreciate that, 'cause
Sure.
we still have a lot more people
Yeah,
testifying.
yeah, okay.
I see 2 books, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is scaring me.
I'm not going to touch that.
Okay.
So, just
All right.
there's 2 bits of background. The first is the United States Global Change Research Program produces a national climate assessment periodically. This is the most recent version of it, and it just says what we know about carbon pollution and the risks and impacts of continued carbon pollution. The other the other related thing is that the IPCC and others say that we won't reach our climate goals without carbon pricing around the world. 46 countries are pricing carbon now, including, so now I'm starting to talk about why it matters to New Hampshire. New Hampshire businesses that export to the EU. The European Union has a price of $110 per ton of CO2 emissions on their fossil fuels for industry.
Yeah, we have to really stick to the bill
Okay.
rather than the effects, if you will.
Sure.
We're more concerned about getting this right as far as making sure that we're improving net metering, we're not improving it. And,
Right. Okay, well, I just wanted to say this is the right direction for us, for transmission uses, as you mentioned, but also for our businesses and trade with other countries, because they are putting prices on carbon. Canada will be $135 per ton by 2030. The EU is $110 per ton now. And they're going to start using border carbon adjustments, the EU in 2026, putting their carbon price on whatever products we export into those markets. So by decarbonizing New Hampshire, by making it easier for our businesses and towns to use clean energy resources, we are preparing to be more competitive in the global marketplace. And so this will help northern industries and other countries in competition with other countries, because we won't be paying those other countries for our carbon pollution if we're not producing it. And so thank you for your details of this bill. I think it's really important to do what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? How many more you got? No, I'm just kidding. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, John. I'm trying to cut, sorry for cutting you short. I just want to get really to the specifics of the bill. Yeah, lots of details, and we appreciate you. Next, we have Sam Evan Brown, Clean Energy.
I'll be very brief because we've been talking about this one for a while. I would simply say when it comes to the question of the value of a distributed energy study that is forthcoming from the PUC and the question of how that will interact with the changes that are embodied in this bill to the net metering structure, it's worth remembering that those changes are going to come through a docketing process at the PUC and may take quite a while. Things at the PUC don't happen terribly quickly. And so if there were changes made to the small customer generator definition, or anything else that might impact the rate of return that large manufacturers get when they invest in solar on their sites, it might be a year or 2 years or even more before we see those changes. And so this bill really does embody, I think, a very common sense incremental approach that will improve the economics of these types of projects in the near term, in the immediate term. And so while the VEDR study is something that we are engaged in and are happy to see that progress, I think that should not necessarily make us think that we can't take steps now to try to help our large manufacturers try to reduce their energy bills.
Very precise, thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none,
If I just may, so just the same question I asked Josh, that basically, no matter what that distributed energy study comes out with, that until we have the metering, we really don't know.
I think what you will find when we all get our eyes on that study is that it's going to have to do some generalizing, and it's going to have to do some averaging across rate classes. It's going to use data from other states because, as has been pointed out many times, New Hampshire does not have the data to precisely answer the question of how much cost shifting, when, what types of projects cause cost shifting. That's not to say the VEDR study will be useless. I think it'll be pretty valuable. But we at Clean Energy New Hampshire expect that it will find much the same that many other value of distributed energy studies have found, which is that it can be quite valuable to the system, in particular when generation is sited with load and used as a load reducer in order to reduce everyone's regional charges.
But just to follow up, on the given projects that may be affected by this, we are simply not going to know what those particular projects have as an effect on this until there is metering, which is somewhere in the hazy distance.
I believe that is correct. The study will tell us something, but it will not answer all of our questions.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Heidi, you're the last speaker, unless somebody else wants to speak.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Heidi Kroll. I work at Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and I'm here today representing both the Granite State Hydropower Association and the Monadnock Paper Mills. So we are in support of the bill. The amendment to the bill, we did have some concerns with the bill as introduced, but the amendment addresses those concerns. So we're happy with that and some of the other comments that you've received today about the amendment. We're certainly supportive of the idea that businesses should be able to net meter in kind of this incremental way. I think that makes sense. As other speakers have said, it's a small but important step in the right direction. And we're also supportive of the investigation into the customer generator interconnection procedures in order to increase some transparency and consistency in procedures and eliminate some of the unnecessary time delays and expenses. People might think of that as being uniquely a new solar development problem, but in instances where hydro facilities that have been dormant for a very long time and are being renovated to come back online could also encounter these sort of interconnection questions and cost implications and that sort of thing. Two things that I did want to point out, and people can take this under consideration. Section 5 of the bill puts that, we don't have a problem with what the words say, but it puts that section, and this is in the amendment, puts that section into 374G:4A, which is 374G is electric utility investment in distributed energy resources. And I think the intent here is really not to limit it to utility investment. It's anybody's investment, public, private, utility. So that may lend itself better to potentially just being a section at the very end of 362-A:9, which is this whole chapter on net metering. So it could be like a section Roman 22, for example.
So how would I change that then? Just strike 374GA?
Yep, I mean, this is just my suggestion, other people can weigh in, but I think you could strike 374-G and simply replace it with 362-A:9, and then it could be a new section, Roman 20, which would be the, 22, which would be the next kind of section to fall in 362-A:9. And a similar sort of question, I guess, with respect to section 6 of the amendment, doesn't seem to be putting it anywhere in statute. I don't know if that's common or not. Again, I guess I leave that to OLS or somebody else, but it's giving this direction about a new investigation and report without putting it anywhere into law. And so again,
I think it's session law,
session, okay.
I think,
Okay.
but we could check that.
Okay.
So you wouldn't need to.
And my final comment in listening to the comments of the prior speakers, Mr. Elliott from DOE mentioned that potentially limiting the problem's been brought up that there's solar on a fire station in a town and that fire station can't participate in the group net metering that the town is doing. And so somehow limiting the solution to facilities that are newly eligible to participate. And I just wanted to, this section of law where it was stricken about a customer generator also being part of a group is of interest to Monadnock Paper Mills. The mill has small hydro behind the meter that it's been using for decades to power the mill. You will recall that as part of SB 91 last year, there was some clarifying language which was meant to help both Monadnock Paper Mills and a few small hydros that Brookfield owns up in the North Country to be able to participate in net metering. They haven't been able to do that due to a quirky interconnection problem. Both of those entities are still trying to work through getting to net metering with Eversource. And so I just wanted to flag that if there is this kind of narrowing of that language to be only newly eligible, that we would please, in theory, Monadnock Paper Mills and Brookfield are both newly eligible under SB 91. So just wanted to flag that. And with
So
that,
if I just may, I mean, I think we clarified, this doesn't mean newly eligible means that existing ones could take advantage of this, not just that they have to be brand new facilities. I think that's
Right.
what that's why I wanted that clarified. So.
Absolutely, no, and that's my understanding as well, that you're talking about facilities that have had on-site generation but are newly eligible to be participating in net metering. And so, for example, fire station or whatever. And so I just wanted to flag those as well.
Questions? So is there a way that for like the general public to understand Senator Gray's question with regards to that 20%? Are you familiar with what he's trying to get at and understand with the
Yeah.
Is that easily explainable?
Well, I think maybe a little diagram, frankly, would help a lot. I really kind of, this is my understanding, is that you kind of have, based on size of customer generators, you kind of have these three categories. You're having currently what's a category of 0 up to 100 kW, which the bill would, an amendment would seek to raise that to 500. That you then have this next tranche of generators that are either from 100 or 500, depending on what the number is, up to 1 megawatt. And then you've got those above 1 megawatt. And so my understanding is that the 20% rule applies to that middle category. That's my understanding. Somebody
Does this bill affect that at all? The 20%?
I don't believe so, but I could take another look and with that looking at it through that lens.
Not trying to put you on the spot. I just want, just for clarification, and I see Dan saying no. Cliff, yes, no?
Yeah.
No?
Except that it changes where the
I really appreciate your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, was that clear, Senator Gray?
I don't think we're going to attack this bill.
I don't think so either.
I think that Josh or someone else from the DOE will come and educate me, and that's what I need.
That's why I had a study committee a
Thank you.
long time ago, because this is such a complicated issue, and it hasn't gotten any easier, to be honest with you, over time. But I can appreciate the muddy waters. I can really appreciate that. I really do. So does anybody else want to have a final thought? Okay, I see Dan and I see Mark. Can we keep it under a minute? Real quick. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mark Brown. I'm Executive Director Northeast of the Consumer Energy Alliance. I just want to address some of the transmission questions really quickly. One of the things we know is that all the transmission investments in the region have basically eliminated congestion and uplift costs, which roughly a decade ago, those were costing consumers in the region an additional $500 to $600 million a year in energy market costs. So, you know, it's not always about what the transmission costs are, it's what they've done to help deliver both energy market savings and reliability. As far as the, investing in DG to reduce our, regional network service load or charges or however you want to look at it, there's very little evidence that supports that. I like to always point to Massachusetts as an example. They've spent tens of billions of dollars, okay, in behind the meter energy efficiency and all things meant to kind of reduce load. They've cut off about half a point, from maybe 45.3 to 44.8, something like that, off of their network service charges. So I think you have to look at it holistically as to, do the behind the meter investments lead to savings, or are they more costly than the savings actually are? Recognize that the transmission market is about a $2.5 billion market, so every tenth of a point is, $2.5 million in savings. So in theory, Massachusetts has invested, tens of billions of dollars to save $12.5 million a year in transmission savings. And I think one of the reasons is peak loads are shifting to later in the day. So 2021 for New Hampshire, as an example, 1 month had a peak load in the 11 to 12 hour. 1 month had a peak load into 3 to 4 p.m. hour. 3 months had peak loads in the 4 to 5 p.m. hour. 4 months had peak loads into 5 to 6 p.m. And 3 months had peak loads into 6 to 7 p.m. So as peak loads continue to get later in the day, solar is going to have less of an impact on reducing those peaks. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to quickly address the transmission aspect.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. And I see you looking at Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. Thanks for your testimony. So part of the issue, I understand what you're saying about Massachusetts, but isn't part of the issue in comparison to 2 states is that the growth of their load, the growth of electricity use has been reduced because of efficiency and other renewable energy moves, whereas New Hampshire's growth of energy use and a percentage of what we're using in the region has been going up because we've done less of that work.
The data supports that New Hampshire has gone up a little bit. But I think the bigger question is, what investment do you have to make to save that? And we know, large manufacturers moving out of one state. We saw GE move from Connecticut to Massachusetts. There's a whole lot that goes into, what happens with transmission costs. One large energy consumer, if a BA Systems, for example, were to leave New Hampshire, that would have a huge impact on our load. So it's not just about, investments in energy efficiency and distributed generation and what impacts the, our share of the load. It's a much bigger picture.
Yeah, thank you. And one final statement from Dan. Do you have a final statement, or can you make it quick? Because I want to.
Yeah, very quick. I just thought it might be helpful for Senator Gray to, on the 20% question.
I don't want to talk about 20%
Sure.
anymore today. I want
Fair enough.
the DOE to come tell me.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure everyone else shares my concern.
Thank you so much. I appreciated the chance
Thank
earlier.
you. I appreciate all the work you folks
Good
put
job.
into this. All right, and with that, seeing how there's no further questions or statements, we're going to close the hearing on that. And we have SB 321 with somebody by the name of Senator Waters. Is Senator Waters available? You have the floor, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 321 relative to the purchase of output limited electrical energy producers in interstate commerce, including qualifying storage systems. I'll just say a few words about this before turning it over to Deputy Mayor Belo. And basically what the bill does is that it updates what we have done first in 79, then 1998 by Bradley and Belo's bill in terms of creating net metering in New Hampshire. And since then, there's been a lot of questions about how we enable market-based alternatives to net metering, and particularly how do we avoid ratepayer cross subsidies or cost shifting. And one of the ways we try to do that is by enabling in-state distributed generation and storage of less than 5 megawatts that produce power for sale or resale to New Hampshire customers to be accurately credited. So if you're doing that, then you get credit for it because you are not, increasing or cost shifting. And it really builds on what was passed last year in Senate Bill 91, Part 4. But the House wanted to really study this issue of potential cost shifting under LEAP further. So we had the LEAP Study Committee. The chairman and I were on that. I think you've received the report more than once by having been sent related to certain bills and so forth. We kept coming back to that issue about, whether if somebody actually removed themselves from distributed into ISO New England, which seemed to be the case, that if you actually did that, then you were not cost shifting because you were using the power locally. And so what this bill tries to do is to clarify that, yeah, we understand that, and this bill clarifies how the LEAPs work. Now, since the bill was introduced, and also in response to what was in the report and more conversations with Chairman Vose, that the question was, okay, we think we know what we're doing on LEAP, and we're going to have some more study done by the PUC, so that if we move forward in this direction, let's be cautious about it. And while in the final report, there were some changes so that the final report did not say nothing but pilots from now on. It did indicate that pilots were probably a better way to go. So looking at this bill and having some further conversation with Mayor Belo and some conversation with Josh Elliott, that what we think we would do is to amend the bill to say it's going to be a pilot, and say that any utility who wants to get involved with this pilot, and we have to figure out whether we limit the pilot in terms of size or whether it be in terms of duration. But that would be one way of, again, testing this out to see if this method here does in fact avoid the cost shifting and then benefit the limited energy producers. So there's a lot of technicalities in here, as there always are, but that's the short and sweet of it. Trying to build on what we've done in previous bills, including last year, and in the LEAP Study Committee, to make this clarification, which I think really does seem to be the case, that if you do it this way, you're not distributing out into the system, then you aren't cost shifting. But if we do a pilot, then I think we'd be clear with the concerns and intent of the LEAP Committee and also Chairman Vose as well. So why don't I stop with that, Mr. Chairman, and if I may let Deputy Mayor Belo take it from here.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. And we'll
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Good morning, Senators. I'm here on behalf of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire in strong support of this legislation. The coalition is was incorporated as a nonprofit governmental instrumentality operating pursuant to a joint powers agreement under RSA 53A and 53E. Our 18 local government members, actually specifically the 17 municipal members, we also have a county, but the municipal members comprise about 18% of the state's population. And we're looking to launch, hopefully in 2023, community power aggregations. City of Nashua is one of those municipal members. Passage of Senate Bill 321 would fix New Hampshire law to ensure that community power aggregations and competitive electric power suppliers that source power from local distributed energy resources are properly credited for lowering energy, transmission, and capacity charges. This bill creates a market-based alternative to group net metering that seeks to avoid cross-subsidies, yet properly credit distributed energy resources for the actual value and cost savings that they generate. When the committee and the Senate voted last year to send Senate Bill 91 over to the House, it included Part 4, as Senator Waters mentioned. That section was sponsored by Senator Bradley, along with Senator Waters, Avard, and Gaida of this committee. And it was really an earlier version of the same concept. The House had questions about the concept, so amended that section of the bill to create a study commission, the Limited Electrical Energy Producers Study Commission. And the Senate concurred to ensure passage of other important parts of Senate Bill 91. The commission met 4 times last October with Senators Avard and Waters participating. I have brought along copies of that report with the appendix for you. The appendix includes all the testimony that was submitted, and a big chunk of that is from the Community Power Coalition and provides a lot more explanation of the concepts involved. But I just want to highlight how this particular text was informed by that study commission, and then conclude by saying that we're very amenable to working with Senator Waters, the Department of Energy, Clean Energy New Hampshire, and any other interested parties in developing an amendment specifically to enable piloting of the concepts in the bill for your consideration in the next couple of weeks. I know you have to report this bill by, I think, March 17th is the deadline, but you'd like to get it done before that, so we'll work to do that. So I guess I could pause and walk you through how the bill's informed, but on the other hand, maybe I don't need to go into that at this point. It's sort of outlined in my letter. So it's really your preference.
And maybe I could just ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
That might shorten this. Is that the bottom line here is that the LEAP Commission said that if you were truly out of FERC
jurisdiction, right?
And we make that clear. You're out of FERC and you're out of ISO. Then you're a limited producer in your network, and so this clarifies that you are not, and you're not net metering. That then it clarifies that you are not, using a distribution system that way, and you ought to get credit for it. That the short and sweet.
Right. And this is the same rationale that the electric utilities are using for some of their investments. And I would just point to a couple specific examples of that. Liberty Utilities did a battery pilot, and a lot of the basis for that was not just the avoided energy costs, but the value of dispatching the battery at the hours of coincident peak on which transmission charges and capacity charges are based. Likewise, Eversource proposed a battery pilot, and they stated that a good part of their proposal that was filed at the PUC was predicated on the value that could be realized by using that generation as a load reducer. I wanted to quote from it because it's pretty straightforward what they said. In their filing at the PUC, they pointed out that their 1.5 megawatt battery project would achieve approximately 485,000 in annual projected RNS, LNS, those are transmission charges, and ISO New England capacity charge reduction through peak shaving. And they wrote, using generators as load reducers simply entails counting the generator's output as an offset to monthly or summer peaks instead of bidding the output into the wholesale market as settlement-only generators and taking the market clearing price as compensation. And in the testimony that the study commission received was ISO New England basically saying this is not a problem from our point of view. If you want to do this, you can do this, because if they don't register with us as a generator, if they're under 5 megawatts, they're tied to the distribution system, then they treat it as load reducers in terms of our markets. And what this really does is try to create an opportunity for bilateral arrangements between a producer and a load serving entity that might be a community power aggregation or competitive supplier to use the output of that generation directly to offset what they otherwise have to buy in the interstate wholesale market. And also get to recognize the value that produces as a load reducer relative to both capacity charges and transmission charges. That's the concept. In some ways is simple, and it goes back to way back in 1979 when this part of the limited electrical producer statute was first enacted. And when now Senator Bradley and I were in the House working on electric utility restructuring with the idea that customers should be able to have some choice in their power supply, we followed that with the legislation that created net metering and tried to reform this part of the statute to create it as sort of a market-based alternative, but we didn't really get it right back then. So I've been working for the past 4 years to get this part squared away, because I think if we could figure this out, it would take away a lot of the debates around net metering and cross subsidies. In a specific case in point that I've opened a conversation with Liberty about as a potential pilot is our landfill gas to generation project. As a group net metered project, we will get paid, their current average default service rate for all of that output, which is going to be around 7,000 megawatt hours a year, which translates into about $700,000 a year in payment to us under group net metering. Right now, they would charge that $700,000 to other default service customers and raise their rates as a result. We think that we might actually be equal or better off if we could do this instead of group net metering. If we could just say, we want to sell the output to Lebanon Community Power or Upper Valley Community Power as part of a portfolio of resources we use to meet customer needs. And we don't have to, Liberty doesn't have to pay us anything for the energy. Instead, we just want a mechanism where the value we actually produce in terms of reducing transmission charges and capacity costs, we can actually get credit for most of that. The bill's written in a way that some of that is shared with other customers as well. But that's a detail. But the concept, that's not going to go online for about a year from now. It's mainly because of the distribution transmission system upgrades, sort of the critical path. But my point is, I think there's some opportunities to pilot this idea, and in a way that kind of moves us in the direction of a market-based alternative. We've talked with a number of our large institutional customers in the area that have sustainability commitments. They have said they would love to be able to directly purchase or purchase through Lebanon Community Power the output from some solar plus storage projects. We have sites for those. And rather than go through the contortions of group net metering and the issues that raises, this could provide an alternative where it just becomes part of the resource portfolio. And one of the concerns that was raised in the first version of the bill that went to the House as well as the study commission is wanting to make sure that this doesn't burden the distribution utility in terms of accounting for this and facilitating it. All that burden's placed on the load serving entity that is not default service. That default service doesn't ever have to participate in this. The distribution utility obviously has some role, but the goal of it is to minimize their responsibilities for accounting for this. Obviously, there has to be some revenue grade interval metering to confirm the actual production at these coincident peaks. But they're doing that now for the battery pilot, for instance, with Liberty. They're doing exactly that. And they're accounting for these same values in justifying the cost effectiveness of that battery pilot.
So how would a pilot program work with this legislation?
Well, I've been thinking about that. We've really only, it took a couple of weeks to get a meeting with DOE. And so we've really only been talking about this for about about a week now, or less than that. That's where I think we'd like to come back with you in a week or two with proposed text. We want to make it generic, so it would require one or more of the distribution utilities to agree with a counterparty to pilot this. Nobody would be forced to pilot it. It would have to be by mutual agreement. It could be, I would expect we'd want it to be informed by the value of DER study that's going on, because that'll be available soon. And I would expect that it would have to be a proposal that comes into the PUC for review and approval and adjudicated process. So it might take a little while to set up a pilot, but those are some of the features I think we're thinking about. And so there may be a few things that actually have to be enacted as part of this bill to enable that, or it could be referenced in session law. Here's the concepts that was in the bill as introduced that we're authorizing the commission to, approve a pilot if it finds that it's for the public good and stuff like that.
Okay, we're gonna have a lot of bills to execute. A lot of them. Today. Well, all right, questions from the committee?
Yeah.
Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah. So, Cliff, am I understanding that you're looking basically to make yourself independent of transmission and to localize within a distribution network your power production?
Well, not entirely, because a load serving entity by definition has to provide all requirements load following service. So we're always going to be interacting with the ISO New England market to balance our overall load and supply it. So it doesn't eliminate it. One of the concepts that I will say in particular Representative Vose liked was and it's reflected in this bill, is the possibility that you take the transmission charge, which is this very strong marginal cost price signal, meaning it's based on share of coincident peak demand, because the transmission system has to be sized to meet that peak demand. And if you don't have load at the peak demand, you're not charged for the use of the transmission. It's just everybody's share at peak. Well, in other jurisdictions, in fact, the ISO New England tariffs provide for this, and National Grid's tariffs in Rhode Island provide for this. And Eversource actually does this for some of their large C&I customers, and this is done in Pennsylvania. Instead of those transmission charges being charged to the distribution utility and turned into a flat per kilowatt hour rate, which gives no incentive to shift load off peak, those costs are sometimes levied directly against the load serving entity, or in Eversource's case in Western Mass with their large C&I customers where they have interval metering, the individual customer actually pays based on their share of coincident peak demand. So they have a built-in incentive to try to shift that if it's otherwise cost effective for them. And the same is true, for instance, in Pennsylvania and PJM. The load serving entities each get their pro rata share of coincident peak demand, so they have a structural incentive to help customers reduce that. And ultimately, the value to everyone else is if we can grow load, like through beneficial electrification, electric vehicles, whatever, and do that more off-peak than on-peak, what we end up doing is for existing capacity in the system, we actually share the cost of that over more kilowatt hours, Whereas if we don't have these price signals and we grow the peak faster than the load, then we actually increase our costs because incremental new capacity costs a lot, and we're actually spreading those costs over fewer kilowatt hours. So that there is a lot, and we've been going in the wrong direction for decades. We've become more peakier, so we're spreading more capacity costs over fewer kilowatt hours. If we can begin to reverse that trend with the appropriate price signals, then we actually start to lower costs for everybody because we're spreading them over more kilowatt hours without having to build more peak capacity. So that's an underlying sort of benefit to this approach.
And so what this bill is proposing would move us down that road?
Yes.
Thank you.
And just in reference to the last bill, I wanted to mention two things. I think session law is a good place to put one-time studies rather than put them in statute than repeal it. So it used to be session law was very common when you just did a study committee or directed an agency to do a study. And the other little thought was the hosting maps. A good place for that would be in 362A, but create a new subsection number 10 after net metering, which is number 9. So the hosting map just sort of stands by itself because it is generic to not just net metering, but also potentially these limited electrical producers. Yeah, so just stick it. It could be a new section 10 that just stands alone at the end of the LIPA statute.
Wonderful. All right. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Donna. Welcome. How are you today?
Hey, how are you?
All right. Thoughts on a pilot?
Yes, thank you. So I didn't come here prepared to speak to a pilot, but I would just say generally, I don't know an instance when we'd ever oppose a pilot, and I do look forward to the opportunities that a pilot might provide some really good insights, because I'm not going to get into it now, but there are some disagreements on where there's federal jurisdiction and where our hands are tied. So a pilot might serve that purpose very usefully. Thank you.
We really appreciate that. Thank you. I thought that might change the conversation a little bit, but perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Questions?
you.
No, just for the record, you are speaking to a pilot.
Yes, I'm speaking to a pilot. Thank you. At least a former pilot, or maybe you still are.
Is that a pun or double entendre? Thank you. Mark? Pun intended, yes. Mark?
I'll be brief. For the record, Mark Brown, Consumer Energy Alliance. The pilot, yeah, I guess as long as we can make sure that certain guardrails are put into place and the jurisdictional question is answered. And, I know Mr. Bilo does care a great deal about cost shifting, so, I know this could be a good idea. It could be the best approach. So that's it.
We like pilots.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, is that right?
And if I may just say, the part of the pilot, I'm sure we would include interval metering as a requirement, and that may help us answer quite a few questions.
How soon can we get a draft for this pilot?
By the time we meet next.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to exec as many as possible, so.
Yeah, but at our next meeting, we'll have you on, okay?
Sam?
So,
Samwise Ganji.
handing out testimony from, I also forgot to hand in my testimony from the last bill, so you have written testimony there as well. I also wanted to just give the committee a letter that comes from Borrego Solar, which is a large solar developer that has struggled to enter the New Hampshire market because their sweet spot is these 1 to 5 megawatt projects that are below FERC jurisdiction, but are capturing economies of scale that you don't get in projects that are a megawatt or smaller. And we forwarded them this legislation and essentially said, what do you think? And they said, really interesting. Here's a program that would be an alternative business model to net metering that would allow us to develop projects of these size and would avoid the questions of cost shift. Generally speaking, I think this is where New Hampshire often shines in policymaking, is rather than doing what other states have done, is trying to look at another way that is more responsive to price signals, that is more representative of the costs that and what and the reliability needs of the energy system as a whole. And so while I'm sure that there are concerns about this bill and those may lead us to a pilot rather than a immediate rollout of a full-scale program, I hope that we can work through them. I think this is a really good idea that we should try. I will say the previous executive director of Clean Energy New Hampshire said that she was no longer willing to let anything be called a pilot because it seems like that's all we do in New Hampshire is pilots on top of pilots, but we do love a pilot.
Any comments from the committee? Seeing none. All right, thank you very much. I don't have anybody else to speak on this. Anybody? I know, I'm kidding you. Josh Elliott, Department of Energy.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, the Department of Energy. I will be very brief. Obviously, you've heard a lot about this issue today. It's a complex issue, which is why the department thinks that a pilot would probably be the best path forward for developing this further. I will say the Department of Energy is happy to review any language. Obviously, devil's in the details, but we're happy to take a look at what gets pulled together by the advocates.
Okay. Questions from the committee?
Oh, I should say we're neutral on the concept, on the bill as well as the concept, but we think if this is a good path forward for the concept.
Great. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to put in their 2 cents? Going once, going twice. Closing the hearing. That was a lot for 2 bills.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of good issues. I think, Senator Gray, that 10 to 50, the 20 to 50. It would be good to get some answers on that.
Yeah.
I kind of understand, but I don't understand it. So that'd be
Right.
good. Kind of, but maybe.
So,
Again, the reason I asked not to continue that at the time is I want the statute references.
Yeah.
Because statute references are going to start to answer my question and give me the ability to look at if there are any changes where in the statute those would.
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. So,
Move exec.
you want a second exec? I'm going to keep it simple today, but we do have a lot to exec. So, all in favor of exec?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we're not going to exec the 2 that we did today, obviously. But I do want to look at 367. Jody, we had a conversation, and you helped draft this amendment in speaking with the departments, right? Right. So did you get a chance to look at this amendment?
No, but I heard about it.
Okay, here's Senator Gray. Oh, they all have it? All right, well, I have a bunch extra in case you need. Do you want to give that to Jim? So this has to do with the,
Yeah, this looks good.
all right.
This does what we were talking about. I'll move 0753 off the pass. Excuse me, I'll move Senate Bill 367 off the pass.
Is there a second?
Then I'll move the amendment. That's all. I can't move the amendment until.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Now, we don't, no.
For
Now we're gonna talk
discussion?
about the amendment. Now we're gonna talk about the amendment.
Right.
I'll move amendment 0753 so we can talk about it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
So what was brought up is a little conundrum the last time about that we probably want to satisfy DES's need for some review and examination, because otherwise the default is to go to 149M15 and suddenly poof, you're closed, you're dead because you built the plant under one thing and now we're telling you you're a waste recycling facility and you're not going to be able to I'm fine with that. So what I think's good here is it says, yeah, they get to go in and make sure there's nothing that's a nuisance or poses a threat to the environment, fine. And then I think important here, may instead of shall on line 11, so that we've, put the safety back on and taken the finger off the trigger on that one. So, the rest of the bill, I think we're all good on. It's just I just think this helps procedurally.
And the department, they were fine with it, but this actually helps out a little bit more, so I'm in favor of it. So any further discussion?
It gives a non-draconian
Yeah, it's reasonable.
path forward. Right?
Reasonable. Just,
So do you need a motion on the amendment?
I did.
Yeah, you made it.
Second?
I did.
He didn't. And we're in the discussion part?
What day is this?
Yeah. You pilots are
So
all the
we can
same.
vote.
File here.
For real.
2/2/22.
Oh, that's right. You hold it upside down. It's the same.
First day of my 70th year.
Really?
Ah, all right.
It's your birthday today?
Yesterday.
Oh.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you. You said it. Happy birthday. 8th decade. Congratulations.
Yeah, well,
What's it like?
you'll catch up to me. It's good. It's smooth, man. It's smooth. My hair's growing back.
That's scary. All right. Any further discussion? Senator Gray, you comfortable with this?
Yeah.
All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none.
So I'll move up to pass as amended.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? I wish we could, but we don't have Senator Perkins Quokka. So,
Senator Waters will fill it out.
oh,
No,
it's
no,
my
no.
bill.
It's his bill. He's the boss.
My bill.
Don't everybody want to.
He's the pilot, I'm the steward.
Okay. Senator, I don't know, just for discussion sake, where is it?
Had that for a couple weeks.
Which one is that? I was going to take a look at Senator Bradley's bill
Let's
first.
do that, yeah. Whatever.
424, he had an amendment drafted. Did all of you get a chance to look at that amendment? Oh.
I don't know if I've got that.
424? And the amendment replaces section 1 with the following. Is there a motion on the bill?
I'll move the bill up to pass.
Is there a second?
And I'll move the amendment. Well, it's your amendment if you want to move it, but
I'll move my amendment if you second it.
I will.
All right. Senator Bradley draft this amendment. Discussion.
So it seems pretty clear, some clarifications that came out of the hearing, and definition of biomass gasification, get that. And then the procurement. Unmonetary benefits,
It's been 12.
competitive bidding, 5% rule. And then the study. What this
Shall include.
Yeah. Yeah, and prudence of contracts before cost recovery, so. I mean, it seems to button it up, but.
Any further discussion?
I'm just going through it with my notes.
All good? Okay, so all in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none?
Brought to pass as amended.
Second by Senator Gaida. All in discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? I could take it out unless somebody else wants to. I'll take it out. All right. The lead bill, where is that? What one is that? That's Senator D'Alessandro's bill?
Yeah. That's 452.
There it is.
And, you know, we don't have to vote on it today, but I'll tell you what the amendment did. If you have the amendment, it's 0695.
Taylor, do I have that amendment?
Yes, sorry.
I have not seen that amendment. Thank you.
Do you have a copy?
Yeah, I do, thank you. So the amendment does a few things. First, the department very much wanted to have clarification about the testing, the ongoing testing schedule that started in 2016, and, you know, it's in this 3-round cycle and so on. And wanted to make sure that the bill didn't disrupt that, because, you know, if we brought in this requirement out of 5, that it doesn't disrupt the ongoing testing. So that's what that first part does there. And then secondly, what we decided to do was go with 5 parts per billion. Now, you heard from pediatricians that they wanted, well, essentially they wanted 0, but they wanted 1, and then questions Senator Gaida raised about, well, how are the labs doing at 1, and do they have to actually then test to 1/2, and what are we saying? And it seemed that if we went to 5, that we were not creating any problems for the testing capacity. And the other thing that doing 5 is that it takes a lot of pressure off of the number of folks who potentially might now come in under this. We've been testing, we've been testing at 2 rates. We've been doing 15 for the public schools. And then we've been doing 5 for those folks who want to come into the pilot program to get some funding for remediation. That funding that was peeled off from the water fund that went into that, and they're running that program. And so it just made no sense to go less than the 5. The other reason for the 5 is that, as we heard in the testimony, that 5 was come up with because that was their best guesstimate of what the EPA was likely to come out with when the EPA, sets some national standards. Now, the issue, though, about, well, if you come out with, if you pop positive at the 5, is that what can we do to help you out? And I had considerable discussion about whether we could try to reopen the grant that was received from the water fund.
1.6.
So we'd include the daycares, because that does not. That's the public and non-public schools are covered to get some of that funding. But it is quite clear that there is going to be daycare money coming through the EPA, the bill, the infrastructure bill, which has been passed. I guess the understanding is that in March now, they're gonna do the budget bills. You know, they extended the debt limit, but the target is March to the budget bills, and rulemaking will be done. So we will maybe start to get some sense of the funding that we're getting by the time this bill gets signed. So it's essentially, the language here is a promise that we are going to, that daycare centers will be eligible for that funding. They said they already would be. That's what the EPA funding, the federal rules intend. But it is important to make it clear that we understand it's, a whole lot fewer daycare centers might test positive. A whole lot fewer. If you remember the testimony we got about the numbers that would test positive at 5 to 15 and the numbers that would test positive at 1, like 150 or 200. Now we're way down on that to my potentially. So, as Senator Bradley says, maybe this is an amendment that's going to make everybody a little angry. But I think it's reasonable. It's going to help for some healthier. It's always good to get to move on lead. It's going to move us in a good way. We're going to make sure that we try to get some remediation funding where it ought to go. And so that's the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further discussion? Thoughts? Okay.
So I'll move the bill 452 ought to pass.
Senator Gaida seconds.
And now I'll move amendment 0695 ought to pass.
Senator Gaida seconds. Further discussion? All in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
Move ought to pass as amended.
Second by Senator Gaida. Discussion? All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Did you say aye, Senator Gray? Yeah. And the bill passes. So who wants to take this up?
Well, I'll do it. And by the way, I've been communicating constantly with Senator D'Alessandro on it, so.
He's okay with it, obviously? Yeah. Power facility. Senator Bradley's still waiting on amendment on the bio plant. Senator Daniels, PFAS bill. You guys want to at least talk about it? Senator Daniels.
What number is it?
That is, I'm sorry, 341L. Just for discussion's sake, so we know what the temperature is on this. This bill requires St. Cobain Performance Plastics to pay for remediation of water in circular wells. I got some emails saying that there might be some problems with that as far as what was that? There could be some court issues on this regarding separation of powers. Yeah, so I'm not sure what to do with that because I'm not an attorney.
I guess that I understand that we have the agreement. They did make an agreement with St. Cobain. However, what we see now are costs that are not covered by that agreement or are much more than the taxpayers are starting to pick up. And so I think no matter what we do, if we do nothing, I think there's going to be legal action. If we do something, there's likely to be legal action. To me, Senator Daniels' bill, just when you simplify it, it says, who should pay? Should it be the taxpayers or should it be the folks who created the PFAS problem? And I know where I come down on that. So I just mean, maybe it's, I don't know if it's wise to say vote and we'll see where the chips fall, but I'm likely to support this.
Okay, so there was a discussion of on the page 4, line 8, of shall and may. That might alleviate some of the problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
If we can get
may.
that might alleviate the problems in that it. Go ahead.
We've got the department here, right?
I'm not here to speak to St.
You are now.
Well,
Because the pilot said so.
The questions I have are, you know, if a community, there is a PFAS situation in Rochester, okay? And who was responsible for it? Don't know, okay? Now, who should be responsible for any action? That's where we start to get into the legal, you know, implications. And if the legal situation is resolved one way or the other, then how do you get the money back if you've made someone pay that wasn't the one that was found legally to be responsible? So, you know, that's the problem I've got with the way the bill is. You know, certainly, I don't know how many hands are dirty and how many hands are clean, and you know, and we did carve out one organization, one business entity in this bill, and I don't think that that's right either. You know, that's not the thing that we as a committee or we as a Senate ought to be doing. It's setting out a set of rules and saying, well, if you are the one responsible, then you should be responsible for cleaning it up, making restitution or whatever within the other requirements that we, the legislature, put out. So.
Well, they have been determined to be the responsible party.
In this particular bill, they were.
I mean, that's known. I mean, that's, and this legal settlement on it, they signed identifies them as a responsible party.
The one area of real concern was the shall seek remedy through, on line 7, if any payments are not timely. Instead of the attorney shall seek, we can't tell them, we can just say may seek. Was kind of the crux of all the emails. Senator Gaida, you had something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, who exactly sued whom in this litigation that was settled?
It was Merrimack against.
Was
Merrimack against St. Gobain.
Was the town sued? Okay, so then it would have, the town would have to reopen that litigation, and my guess is that, or file a new suit, but again, I don't know the terms of the settlement, whether it precludes that, puts it to bed forever, or.
I may have misspoken because there's the consent decree is operated by DES. So it may have been the Attorney General who brought suit in part on it.
I remember the
And
consent
so,
was.
which then begs, where I was going with this is, the town could file suit, or since the citizens of the town or the water district are going to be, you know, hammered with these cleanup costs, you know.
Right. And this bill, basically, if any payments are not timely, it's the area with the timely payments.
Well, I have a concern with the bill in its entirety in terms of separation of powers. That's a concern to me, too.
I thought the department, when it did testify on this, wasn't it just on that section? Department of Justice is opposed, Brooks clarified. Page 4, line 7 through 8, the lines say that if any payments are not timely made by St. Cobain, blah, blah, blah. They're opposed to this language because they believe it violates the separation. That's the only point where they determined that it was a problem with the separation of powers. It was with that may. So we asked if adding the word may to the language would solve the issues. Mr. Brooks agreed that that change would solve the issue. That's the only issue with the separation of powers.
I disagree. I think that the separation of powers means, are we foreclosing on the possibility of the litigation through the judicial branch by passing this legislation? That's the separation of powers issue I'm concerned with.
Okay, the attorney, the justice said that's their only concern is that line. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna vote for it with an amendment, though. If we can change the language, would you agree to at least changing it?
I'll agree to change the language.
Okay. All right, so there's for a committee amendment,
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, you know, I think that you may be bringing this out 2-2
Mhm.
without Senator Perkins Polka here, but that's up to you.
I don't mind. Yeah, I want to get some of these through, and we can have discussion on the floor.
Well, I'll move a committee amendment. Well, I'll move the bill ought to pass,
All right.
341.
And all,
You have to second.
I'll second it.
Now I'll move a committee amendment to change shall to may on line 8 of page 4.
And I will second that. And,
So that amendment may fail.
all right, well, Senator Guida will be in favor of the changing the shall to may, correct?
Okay, so.
Senator Gray?
Yeah.
All right, so all in favor of changing the shall to may?
Aye.
Aye. I voted twice.
So it's actually a 5-0 vote, okay.
All right. No.
And
All right.
I'll move up to pass as amended.
And is there a second? I will second it, and further discussion. So, I think by changing that language, we solve that, but we can discuss it on the floor and whatnot. But I think, again, I want to move some of these bills along, and I think this is.
If I may, Mr. Chair, you know, the Department of Justice is part of the executive branch.
Correct.
They're not part of the judiciary.
That is correct.
And the concern that I have constitutionally is the legislative here is directing the executive and foreclosing on the judicial branch from taking action here. I think maybe we shouldn't be in such a hurry to exec this and maybe get some thoughts from some of the judicial people.
I'm not sure we foreclose it. I mean, people can sue whenever they want, right? Well, no matter what we do, they can sue. So I don't think we foreclose anything. And I will say that we've been legislating on PFAS for a long time. And, you know, we set up the $50 million water fund and said certain folks should do this and that under that. And we set the criteria that trigger it. I think what this is recognizing, this essence of this bill says, the 5 years, we had to shut down wells 4 and 5. We're paying for all this infrastructure. That was under the settlement. The problem is that in 5 years, we're not gonna be done with the expenses treating this water. And we should be able to recoup that. So now, does that necessitate an opening up of a settlement or something? We'll see, but the lawyers will figure it out. I guess for me, the principle is that if the costs are ongoing, that they ought to be recovered. And, you know, whether that gets settled one way or another, I don't know, but so anyways, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Bob, on that, but I'm not sure that it is a constitutional issue. And, you know, if it is, we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah. I think.
Beats me.
I think it's worth having a debate on the floor over and keeping whether it passes or it dies, at least we're going to have a.
Well, if it's a 2-2, it goes to the floor.
Yeah, it's going to go to the floor, so I
It
think.
goes to the floor no matter what we vote.
And I think at that point, it allows us to tease out some more information on the thing and allows Gary'sville to go a little bit further for discussion. That's all. So it'll be 2-2.
We got to vote.
Oh. All in favor of the bill?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
All right, and I'll take it out. The commission with the kids, did we do that one already?
No, we could have some discussion of it because I have an amendment, but.
Yeah,
it's-
what bill is that? What one? Senator Guida had some.
Yeah, and I don't know, what's the number of that one? 263.
263.
Yeah. Let me just explain what it does in response to Senator Guida's concerns. We got some copies of it. you have it?
Which one?
It's 0663?
Yeah. Let me give it to you, you can copy it.
I've got a copy.
You betcha.
I don't, I give mine to Senator Gaida.
Here. This doesn't even have holes in it.
It's pretty simple, and, you know, I responded to Senator Gaida's concerns, and,
Thank you.
so the amendment does two things. It
No, I thought you were
clarifies
gonna make a
as,
copy.
it clarifies there on line 5, demonstrated academic competency in science or other fields related to the council's duties. Important suggestion. And then I thought I would go further than we had discussed, Senator Gaida, by adding on a line 11, from a wide range of sources and viewpoints. And I think that's essential, and I appreciate the, you know, pointing to that as a concern, because that's the point. That there are going to be, on every issue is going to be people opposed and people for. And that you have to get their scientific reports, and you better get a wide range of them, because we know the way scientific reports are. So that's what the amendment does. And since we met, the Legislative Youth Advisory Council had its annual meeting, and it voted to support this and said that they liked the fact that this would allow a focus here. They are able to spend a little time on this in that council, but they think that there's really very strong interest in this as well. So there it is. And so I will. So we can talk about it. I'll move 6263 off the pass.
Is there a second? For discussion's sake. We're all looking at you.
We can wait. I mean, we can wait. You know,
We don't have to.
Senator Guy and I talked. I addressed the issues in the amendment, and here it is. But we can wait. There's no hurry on this one. There's no physical note.
If I might discuss.
Yes.
I think it's a wonderful thing that people, you know, from age 12 to 25 would be, you know, given a platform, you know, to express their opinions. That looking back from my 72nd year all the way back to this, that you know, part of the thing, the old quote that, you know, if you're not a liberal at age 20, if you're a liberal at age 20 and not at age 70, you're conservative at 70, you know, whether you have
no heart, and then if you
heart or no brain. So
you still got a ways to go.
there are things and priorities that shift as you go through the years. And I think that the youth of New Hampshire, you know, deserve a platform. You know, how formal that platform should be, I'm not quite sure if this does it for me. You know, if it's a duty of the council that's already out there, which pretty much is. So again, that's the reason for my hesitation in doing any seconding of this bill.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate that. And, you know, one thing was interesting is that I hadn't been to one of the council meetings for a while, and I went, because they meet regularly, but they have an official annual meeting in which they look at legislation, and they had a bunch of House bills and looked at this one. And I was really struck by the preparation that they'd done, the research into constitutional, into law cases, and the backgrounds on particularly on House bills, and the questions they had, and also the diversity of opinion. There were people who were, I think it would have reminded us of some of our discussions in a way. They were coming from very different perspectives. As far as this one, the reason they support it is because they just don't feel they have time to take this on, and they realize that since the Youth Advisory Council was set up, that these issues have emerged, obviously for us as well as for young people, as of more concern and more complicated too. And then, we also put into state statute and the adequacy provision that environmental education is something that we now, and outdoor education is something we now have part of adequacy, so that it's kind of timely that this group, which the other group isn't going to look at really, would be able to have some input in it. And that's why, the bill says that they can talk to DOE folks, and also they come talk to us, which is a good experience for them. When youth will come up here to testify, it's a good experience for them. And so, I'm an educator, and I think that this is, from seeing what these young people are capable of and what they have as a learning process, and as, Senator Guida points out, they may not know much, but isn't the point they better find a way to learn about it, and that's what education is for. Now, whether this should be the vehicle for that, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them from across the state. Because, your question about who's going to appoint the economists, I just had noticed that, yes, it's the chair of the delegation. So we'll get a wide perspective that way, too. But, there's going to be a very different perspective on some of these issues in one part of the state as opposed to others. And I think it's a good thing to do. But.
Further discussion?
I thank you for the amendment. And as I think, we have an education system that has 74% of our kids in the 11th grade are not competent in mathematics. That's 3/4. We have 46% of the kids in the 11th grade are not competent in literacy. We're giving 12-year-olds an opportunity to come. They can't read and write, for heaven's sakes. They can't add and subtract. Okay, so I have a concern with that. And I would also ask that those who will be opining on these things as kids have absolutely no sharing of any of the burdens or costs that their thoughts might, invoke. So they bring them forward, and they will tend to influence. They are influenced by educators, and I will tell you that in the school district, on the board that I serve, in the SAU that I work in, they are decidedly, the argument is decidedly pro-climate change and rejects any other science. And there is a growing contingent of people that challenge not the validity, but the impact of climate change as caused by mankind. So I'm concerned about this, if you will, given that we're not doing the job of educating our kids with the basics, that we're going to invite them now to start participating and developing opinions without the tools they need to make cogent decisions. That troubles me greatly. And I keep coming back to the education statistics on the DOE website. That is just untenable. And while this might be nice for kids, we need to spend more time having them study what they should in their classrooms. And again, 12-year-olds, 14, 15, 16, laudable that they might be interested, but again, proficiency in academics. I also would ask what we mean by other fields related to the council's duties. I don't know what that means.
Well, yeah, sure. And I think that, this is why I wanted to have demonstrated competency in here, just exactly to your point.
All right,
That if you're one of those folks, not the 74 and the 74%, that you don't have demonstrated competency, and I agree. Now, other fields related to the work of the council, I mean, you can go back to the fields that are mentioned here, natural resources and wildlife. We're going to have some students who are really interested in animal science. And we have programs in animal science in our CTEs. You're going to have students who are really interested in the outdoor industry. And whether it's the ski areas or, you know, whether it's forest ecology, you know, so, and to me, I mean, I'm really concerned about workforce development and so on. There are going to be some folks who are interested in clean energy, renewable energy, sure, but water supplies, we're just talking about that. Pollution prevention, we're just talking about that.
So would you consider an amendment, if I may, to change the word "or" to the word "and"?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree so much with what you're saying, Bob, and I think that for me is that as an educator, education doesn't happen just in the classroom. You know, and
It's certainly not happening in the
yeah,
classroom.
if these young people want to, you know, look to a career, they had better find opportunities for themselves to get educated on these things. I saw a lot of education going on in that. You know, they had subcommittees. They assigned people to do research on various areas to come in with the research and a point on it. And you know, I thought, geez, some of my college students have been that good. So we could say and other fields. Related to the council's duties, and I just pointed back to them because, you know, that's a big, I want it to be a diverse group of students and, who some might be interested in careers in wildlife management or, you know, in outdoor recreation. Some might be really interested in renewable energy, and some are going to be interested in just the, you know, the larger questions. I mean, you know, we have in our adequacy statute that there's, you know, the issues of climate are you know, in the future. I mean, you know, the costs, I agree, they're not paying electric bills now, but, you know, their lives are certainly going to be affected by what kind of climate they're living in. So anyways, I mean, I'm just yammering away, which is what professors do.
We can change that, but we don't have a motion on the bill itself yet, or do we? No, we're just talking about discussion, whether we're going to open that up. Senator Gray?
First, Ms. Godfrey was very impressive. She very intelligent, very, you know,
Articulate.
Her research, I think, you know, was fine. She did a good job. She really represented, you know, both the Seacoast and her school admirably. But there are other decisions that you make. You know, when we're talking about the limit for PFAS, and certainly, you know, a person can say, you know, 1 and 2, that's the way to go. But when you look at those other situations and other circumstances, what does it mean to get to 1 or 2 as opposed to 5? Then that influences your decision. And what I see in youth is that they are sometimes don't consider those other things as much as other people would. And that they can be influenced. Certainly when I attended UNH, I was an older student. And I had a philosophy professor that was trying to liberalize me, okay?
Didn't work.
Didn't work. Okay, but, you know, clearly by the things that he was espousing about the Vietnam War and other issues that were brought up in that class, and he argued that, you know, been there, got my degree from University of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, you know, Zion campus, okay? And I looked at those things differently, okay? And again, I don't have a problem. They've got a platform right now. And as you said, you know, the subcommittees and different things, if they want to take, you know, the issues in here in energy and make that as a subcommittee in what they're doing. I think that 12 is a little young for being on this, but you know, I'm looking at my grandsons and what they're interested in. And the one that's turning 11 here pretty soon, he was more interested in the sword that's sort of Zelda or whatever it was, than he was, anything else.
Well, I mean,
So-
this group, let's remember, this group has no authority. They'll report, they'll learn in the report. And we heard from the Youth Advisory Committee, they don't have the capacity to take this on. They don't, because they're looking at everything. And that's, their charter is as broad as the legislature. And so that's why they thought this was a good way to go. So I don't see that it will do any harm. I do think that it will be a very beneficial experience for the young people. And I dare say that our having a formal opportunity to have them come in with their considered opinion, as we heard from Ms. Godfrey, will be interesting to us.
So I'll tell you what, we'll take this up again next time, and we'll send a Berkeley quote, because
Yeah, whatever. I mean,
is there a consensus on this other one, 257, which have to do with the sewers?
I think that two of us have a meeting at 12.
Okay, so that's a no. For now. Yes, that's a no, right?
I move to come out of executive session.
All in favor, say aye.
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 We're out of exec. Thank you very much.
Good.
Who'd have thought two bills like that would take so long?
Well, I'm not surprised at all.
I'm kidding.
You know, I mean, down in the weeds. I mean, your hearing took more than my hearing.
Yes,
Okay?
it did. Yes, it did. Thank you, gentlemen.